Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and we are here for my LPL 2026 off-season roster grades video. I'm so excited to get into what is our final off-season roster grades video. We've covered the three other regions that we cover on this channel, the LCS, the LEC, and the LCK, but the LPL always comes last in terms of these off-season videos because they always take the longest for information to come out on who is actually playing for each individual team. A little bit of a spoiler for later on in the video here. We're not entirely certain 100% on every single one of these rosters, but we're certainly in a position where we feel good enough to make this video. Very excited to get into the LPL. As you guys know, I am a caster for LPL English. I'll be covering this league all year long, including at Demacia Cup, and that's where I'm going to start this entire conversation. I hate to plug right at the beginning of a video, but if you've been watching my other content on the other regions, check out the links in the description to the LPL English YouTube and Twitch channel, whichever one you prefer, or both if you really want to. Go ahead and subscribe or follow, whichever, platform you want to end up, being on for the LPL English broadcast, and catch me live casting these games. Obviously, I'm not going to be on every single day, but I will be a caster for LPL English this upcoming year. And I will be on for Demacia Cup, which starts in just a couple of days here for the LPL, the preseason tournament that, is kind of the Kespa Cup of China, if you will, where all of these teams play. A lot of these players get their first look on their new teams, and, there's just a lot of exciting action happening around there. Definitely check out the links in the description. But today, what we're going to be doing in today's video is going over everything you need to know about the offseason here in the LPL. I'll be giving player grades and overall team analysis for every single team's offseason, all 14 of the teams that remain here in the LPL. RIP to RNG and FPX, who are now gone, and just generally giving a thought on the direction that the teams are moving in. This is not my power rankings video. That is going to come closer to the winter split after Demacia Cup, when we have a better idea of where these teams are going to land. But for now, I'm just kind of giving my general thoughts on whether or not I think the team and the organization make good or bad decisions with their roster moves, not so much whether or not those roster moves are going to pay off in year one, if that makes sense. But there's a lot of ground to cover in videos like this. First and foremost, if you find yourself enjoying the video at any point, this is likely going to be basically like a 2-hour-long podcast. If you at any point find yourself enjoying the video, please leave a like. It really helps out the channel. I almost never ask for that at the beginning of these videos, but again, like, these long ones really kind of get buried in the algorithm, so it would help out the channel a ton if you left a like. I know a ton of people have come over in the off season here watching the LCS and the LEC and the LCK versions of these videos, and if you've stuck around, that's awesome. If you want more people to find the channel, liking and subscribing is absolutely the best thing you can do to help out with that. I think another thing is, like, there's a new YouTube feature called Hype. I still don't fully understand it, but I think because I'm kind of a smaller creator, you guys can hype up the video and it helps it in the algorithm. If you want to, you can do that. Certainly not, pressuring you if you've never watched anything before, but people have been asking for ways to, like, support me, and I think that that's the easiest way you can do it, is just subscribing, liking, hyping the channel if you have that available, if you haven't done it for another channel yet, or if you want to do that. Those are all fantastic things that help out a ton. But that's a 3-minute preamble. Let's get into the video itself. The format is going to be very similar, identical to the ones that we've already done for the other regions, but in case you have not watched those videos, in case you are tuning in for the first time here for the LPL, we're going to throw up the key on the screen now. We've got a lot of housekeeping to go over, and the first and most important bit of housekeeping that I have to get into, this is just my opinion. I get comments every single day telling me that I'm stupid and I don't understand, and clearly I'm not watching the games, or I'm not, paying attention, or I don't understand what's going on clearly. Like, all of this stuff, I get thrown these accusations every single time I make one of these videos. It's okay for me to have a different opinion than you. I promise, though, the world's not going to end, and there are going to be some things in this video that are relatively controversial. That's actually something that I would consider myself pretty known for at this point. I'm pretty consistently going against the grain. Not because I want to, but because I'm just going to be honest about my opinions here. I'm not necessarily going to artificially, push down my passion for either a good or a bad player because they don't have the same kind of ferocity from the fan base of the region or generally from other analysts. I'm going to give my honest, unfiltered opinions, and I think that's what a lot of people end up valuing with this channel. Whether you agree or disagree, I'd love to know what your thoughts are on all of these grades down in the comments as we go through them. Let me know your favorite or your least favorite grade, but the big piece of housekeeping is, of course, that this is an opinion video, and your opinion is going to be different. You can love me as a creator and dislike many of the takes that are going to be in this video. As long as you share and express those in a constructive way down in the comments, then obviously everything is all good. I do have a bit of background to back this up. I've been covering the LPL on this channel since 2021. I've been covering the LPL statistically for many websites and tracking stats for this league and many others for many years now, almost a decade now, in LOL Esports. And of course, like I said, throughout a lot of last year, I was a caster for LPL English, and you know, I would say that I have a pretty good understanding of the career trajectories of a lot of these players and the context kind of surrounding their circumstances, but that kind of translates itself into the key. I want to make it very clear. I say this in every single video, and yet people, I think, still, you know, kind of, I hate to say take my words out of context. I get that the grades are kind of the selling point of the video, but at the end of the day, these are just a visual aid for the words that are coming out of my mouth. If you have a grade in your head for what you think a player is, and I'm, you know, 1 or 2 grades off of that grade, we're probably not all that different, especially if you hear the words that I'm saying and, you know, hear a lot of things that you agree with or that you feel similarly to. I would take that over the letter grade. The letter grade here is just going to be a visualizer for a more, I guess, scientific ranking of these players, or, you know, overall evaluation of these players. Things are significantly more dynamic than that in LoL Esports. Players are good and bad at different things. 2 players can both be B-graded players and be completely opposite in terms of play style, even at the same position. That's just kind of the way that things end up breaking down. But going over my evaluation for this key and for these players, you have 3 big tiers, your A, B, and C tier, and then within that, obviously, your plus, your minus, and just your A, B, and C. We'll go ahead and talk about what each of these grades ends up meaning, starting with A+. First off, I say this at the beginning of every video, but if you are in the A's anywhere, if you're an A+, an A, or an A-, I consider you an elite level player. I consider you someone that's good enough to win MVP in the league and to actively dominate. Again, the pluses and minuses are more so there for confidence and just how much I trust that you are definitely going to play like that throughout the year. A+, I've definitely gotten some comments about X player should be A+, how are they an A or an A- and not an A+. I want to be very clear. There are many years where regions have 0 A+ caliber players. I think that there is this kind of idea that, oh, this player is the best player in their role in the entire world. That means they're an A+. Not necessarily. I don't have a single support in the world as an A+ caliber player. I think that there are some phenomenal supports, but I don't think that there is anyone that breaks the game quite like that. In fact, as you guys know, in terms of like overall, you know, region strength, I have 1 A+ player in every region, and that's comparatively to the region, right? Like when you're talking about true A+ players, like on a global scale, I think there's 2 in the world. I think there's Chovy, as I talked about in the LCK video, and I think there's 1 player in this video that you can probably already guess who it is. They're the only 2 players in the world to me that are A+ caliber. That means that there is no one in the LCK or LPL with an A+ grade in top, jungle, AD carry, and support, and that's just the way that I view it, right? If you want to have a different grading scale, if you want to say that, oh, well, how can you be the best player in your role in the world and not be an A+, that's totally fine. That's your grading scale, but that's not how my grading scale works for this video. A+ is reserved entirely for people that I would say at any given point can have an argument be made for them to be the single best player in the world. As you get to A, these are your superstars. These are players that are not only going to be fighting for MVP, but are likely going to be not borderline, but clear-cut top 1 in their position in the entire league and are going to be competing to win MVP at any given time. Favorites to win MVP, 2nd or 3rd best players in the league type of player. A- is still elite. I see a lot of people taking A- as a disrespect. I really don't mean it as such. I think A- is intended to be, you are still an MVP caliber player, but I'm just not quite as confident that you are definitely going to perform at an MVP level in the same way that I feel very confident that A+ and A players are just not going to perform poorly, right? It just would be more of a surprise. A- has more variance in it, but the highs of an A- player are still very much there, and many A- players have gone on to win MVP. Many retaining MVPs, or I guess, you know, MVPs that are running it back have gotten A- grades from me in the past, just because I'm not quite sure they're going to be able to repeat it, but I want to give credit to what the good talent looks like. A- is that you are elite, but are you going to be elite kind of grade, which I think is an interesting conversation to have. Then once you start getting into the Bs are still very good starters. These are players that I feel very good about starting in the LPL. The only real difference between B+ and B is how confident I am that you are going to be a good starter. B+ players are players that have decently high highs, but more importantly, pretty high floors. Players that I would be really surprised if they were just outright bad throughout any part of the year, or, you know, overall were just not productive players. These are typically players that have been good for long periods of time or have proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that you can kind of trust them. Maybe they're not good enough to be like the #1 option on a team that wants to go to Worlds, but they're certainly good enough to be on a Worlds or championship caliber team in the LPL. They are definitely good enough to be, you know, second, third, fourth pieces on the best team in the league. Same thing for B. B players are functionally not all that different to B+ in my mind. Again, it's more so just how confident am I that you actually are going to perform the way that, you know, I think you're going to perform going into this year. B+ players I can feel confident about. They're going to be fine. I would be surprised if they were just outright terrible. B players have more of a risk-reward type of, I guess, performance aspect to them, and especially here in the LPL, as we are going to get into, boy, is there a talent drop-off after, like, the best players in the region. Like, once you get to 5 or 6 in any position, you're looking at, like, B- kinds of players, and basically everybody just melds into one big conglomeration there. So B is still considered to be a good starter, somebody that I'm happy is, you know, good, like, on a top-tier team, or happy is, you know, given the keys to a lower-tier team and maybe the best player on a weaker mid-tier team, but maybe has more questions that they have to answer throughout the year. Once you get to B-, this is where you get into the okay starters. This is the end of what I would consider to be players that I'm okay with starting, or at the very least, like, feel good about starting. Likely, you're not going to be able to win the league with a B- starter. It's just really tough to be able to do that, but these are the kinds of players that, you know, have stuck around in the league for a while, or are maybe young players that haven't necessarily proven themselves yet. These are players that I'm happy have a starting spot, but need to prove that they belong higher on this list, have something that they have yet to prove. They're not quite a good starter. They're just kind of someone that I'm taking a wait and see approach, but I'm leaning on the side of positivity. And then once you start getting into the Cs, this is where I really start questioning the roster's decision to bring them on. C+ is going to be your weak starters. These are players that are basically how I would describe them as replacement level players. If B- players are what I would consider to be average starters, which is the way I've always described B- as like your stock standard average player. You know, I'm not going to spoil a ton of grades throughout this video, but think of like a ZDZ who's been in the league forever, and he's a starting caliber player, but he's not really going to like push the game forward. He needs a team around him. C+ is your replacement level player, somebody that you're like, yeah, I mean, I'm okay with them starting right now, but like, do I feel good about that? Do I want to move forward in my organization with a C+ player? Probably not. Now, some of these players are going to be young and unproven and have a lot of potential to grow. It just means that their floor might be closer to like, you know, not a strong starter in the league. This is somebody that I'm okay with having a starting spot, but they need to prove to me that they can keep it throughout the rest of the year. And then once you get to C or C-, this is like your, I mean, C is like a borderline starter. This is somebody who I would bet against being a starting caliber player at the LPL level. Maybe they can prove me wrong, but players that have either major deficiencies in their game, you know, very one-dimensional parts of their game, or alternatively are players that have played at this level and are just not good and proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that they're likely not going to be good at this level. We'll have a couple of Cs. There are no C- in this video, but C- would be not starter quality. These are players that not only do I not believe that they should be starting, but I'm honestly stunned that they were given opportunities. I've given this C- grade very tentatively in the past to players. Not all of them have aged well. In fact, I think Taeyun got a C- for me last year coming over from the LCK because he was the worst graded LCK player I had ever evaluated. He was fine, generally speaking, for WE. We talked about him in the LCK video, of course, and we'll talk about WE more, but C- is not really going to be used in a video unless there's a player that I really want to push back against having a spot. But overall, that is the grading scale. Again, it's very flexible. It's intended to be entirely flexible and, quite frankly, entirely, you know, arbitrary, right? Like, these are just my opinions. These are where I would put a lot of these players. And of course, the specifics that I give of why they fall into each grade end up mattering more. But that's the bit of housekeeping out of the way. That's a 13-minute intro. This is going to be a 2-hour-long video. There's 14 teams to cover, and I am going to go in depth, so strap in. This is basically a podcast. Put me on 1.25 or 1.5 if you really want. I know I already talk a bit fast, but if you do, you know, put me on 1.25, I understand. But let's go ahead and jump into these teams. The order that that we are going to do, everybody, in today's video is the same as the other videos. We are going to be going from first place in the summer split of last year down to last place in the summer split of last year, talking about teams in descending order, which means we're going to start with our champions and get to the team that finished last. And that means our defending champions are first. And it's a defending champion that didn't really feel like a defending champion at any point throughout the year, a team that really underperformed at Worlds. It was Bilibili Gaming. What a weird year for BLG. They somehow come out on top in the summer split, go to Worlds as the #1 seed from the LPL, and then don't make it out of the Swiss stage, losing to Top Esports, a team that they had beaten twice in the playoffs to win the LPL. It wasn't particularly surprising. I predicted Top Esports in that series, that best of 3, to get out of Swiss stage, but still, I think this team had ridiculous expectations that they couldn't quite live up to internationally, and this is kind of a return to form, I would say, in terms of the roster that they are trotting out for 2026. Their 2025 roster had a pretty big hole in the jungle position that they just couldn't seem to solve. They are hopeful that reuniting a familiar face with the Oregon with a couple of these players is going to solve a lot of their, I'll say chemistry issues that they generally had, their macro issues that they had throughout a lot of last year, and they were the big winners in terms of being able to get the trio that it seems like a lot of the top tier teams in the LPL were going after. So we'll quickly talk about what you're seeing on your screen. First, there are 2 teams on the screen. The top side of the screen is spent on the 2025 version of the roster. The bottom side will be the 2026 version of the roster. Now, some of these are reported. They're not guaranteed or anything like that. Some of these have not been technically announced, but these are generally, I think, what a lot of people are expecting the rosters to be for these teams. Every single player is going to have a grade next to them. We already went over the grades. There are going to be some things in the middle of the screen that you're seeing. Upgrade and downgrade, I think, are pretty self-explanatory. Those are going to be, I think you got better in that position, or I think you got worse in that position. Likely, basically no matter what, like I would be surprised if a downgrade turned into an upgrade really under any circumstance. We'll get to what I would put if I think it's a little bit more up in the air. No change is going to indicate that there is no change. It's the same exact player as last year, and you are retaining that same thing. And then if there is a yellow change in the middle of the screen, that just kind of denotes that I think you are either side grading, like the players are pretty evenly skilled, and I don't think you're necessarily getting a ton better or a ton worse, or you could perhaps be getting worse in the short term in order to get better in the long term with a player that potentially has more upside. I think that there are quite a few examples of that throughout this video, but fortunately none to show off for Bilibili. But that is kind of everything you need to know about what you're seeing on the screen. Let's get into BLG's 2026 roster. It is looking like Bin in the top lane, Shun in the jungle, Knight in the mid lane, Viper at AD carry, and On at support. Again, there was a trio kind of going around in the offseason for a couple of teams. Shun, Knight, and Viper seemed to kind of be a package deal in terms of going to teams together. It really came down to LGD Gaming or BLG that all 3 were going to end up on, but once BLG was able to re-sign Knight, it felt like everything just fell into place. They targeted Shun throughout the entire offseason, wanting to reunite him with Knight. It felt like those 2 wanted to play together pretty heavily, and BLG, after the jungle woes that they had in 2025, definitely wanted to get a more stable and more familiar jungle back into when they found success. And then you just go out and pick up who is now likely the best AD carry in the LPL coming back over from the LCK. This has to be considered a winning offseason for the defending champions. I think they're significantly better than they were last year, but let's go ahead and talk about the players that are remaining. Spoiler alert, Knight is the only A+ player in this video. Again, I talked about that before. I think that A+ should be very limited, but to me, Knight has proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that he is the greatest LPL player of all time. I don't think there is any question at this point. There is no argument. There is no conversation to be had. I know people are going to throw conversations out there. Uzi is going to be the main name that people throw out. Uzi was a very great player. He was not what Knight has been over the past 5 to 6 years in the LPL. This guy's run of dominance has basically been untouched. He is the winningest player in LPL history. He now has the most trophies, the most championships of anybody in LPL history, and this guy's made World Finals. Like, there's just not really a lot to say. He was my MVP last year for the LPL. Kanavi, I think, was my spring MVP, and I think Jackie Love ended up getting it in summer, but Knight to me was my choice. I really think he was hard carrying this team at times throughout 2026 and was not necessarily getting that same kind of credit. And at this point, there's just not really a lot to look at for Knight and say that, oh, he needs to do this better. He's just excellent in every aspect of the game. He actively won them the finals. Like, if you go back and watch the LPL finals, like, he was the guy who ended up winning that game number 5. Now, to be fair, he put them in a bad spot in that finals to begin with in games 2 and 3, where he kind of got outplayed by Cream, but he made up for it in games 4 and 5 when they ended up coming back to win the series. But I can't really argue any other direction. I think Knight is a game-breaking, generational type of player. I think he's currently putting himself in the argument to be a top 5 mid laner of all time. And certainly, I think if you want to make the argument that he's already there, I'm not going to push back on that, really, at all. If he had a world championship, it would be a no-brainer. But this guy's won MSI. He's, again, the best player domestically in LPL history. There's just not much else to say. There's nobody in the league more valuable than Knight, and BLG are going to be ecstatic that they were able to bring him back. As for the other two players that returned here, Bin and On, both are getting A-minuses, but boy, are they coming from different places. These players are super inconsistent, man, and this is where I have to make the overall statement that, because there are going to be some people that just look at how Bin and On played last year and say that there's no way that those are A- players. Those are B+ caliber players. I kind of agree with you in the way that they actually function, but the reality of the situation right now in the LPL is that there's no depth. There is no depth in this league in terms of proven talent. We're going to talk about it. There's a B-graded player. I think support in particular. There are B-graded players that are going to grade out as the 3rd or 4th best supports in the entire league. That is ridiculous in terms of where the depth is, because so many players are not playing over the course of this split. That means that some of these players have their values a bit artificially inflated. I think On is kind of the prime example of that. I really still like On as a player. I know that's not a popular take right now, especially for analysts, but his risk-reward style at the very least gets you some advantages, and it feels like so many supports in the LPL just don't even do that. Like, they don't even generate any value or resources. They're just playing safe and, at times losing lane for their AD carry. On is a player that, yes, is going to lose matchups, is going to overstep and be in bad spots, but he's still a very creative playmaker, and when you can get him into good spots, especially in the mid game, he's going to be a menace. I have a feeling that this 2v2 is going to be super strong going into next year when On and Elk were at their best as a duo. It was when they were dominating early game and generating so many resources that they could skirmish and fight whenever they wanted. That was 2023 BLG. I think Viper is like a better version of that because he's just so good in lane. So I expect a good year out of On. I'm tentatively keeping him in the A's here, even though I don't think that's going to be the most popular or common opinion. Same thing for Bin, who's coming off of a terrible World Championships, easily the worst he's ever played at an international tournament. I kind of have to just look the other way on that. I was pretty vocal going into Worlds about how Bin, let's not overvalue Bin. I think some people were putting him in their top 10 players at Worlds videos, and it's like, I get it, you didn't really watch the LPL this year, but Bin was off his game last year. There's not really a lot to say. It was one of the weaker years he's had in his entire career, and even still, he was probably a top 3-ish top laner in the LPL. He had a ton of games where he was still able to accomplish a lot. It's just the consistency with which that was happening was incredibly low. I think the meta didn't really favor him all that much, and while I think the meta is a bit different going into 2026, I have some concerns that he's just too aggressive right now for the rest of what BLG want to do. If he can slot back into the role that he played in 2023, where he was just winning 1v1, generating a ton of resources, and then demolishing people in the late game, that's the version of Bin that is the best top laner in the world, the player that I was calling the best top laner in the world. He can still get back to that, but again, I'm a bit concerned about what we saw on tape. I think he will be better this year than he was last year, and that's an A-ish caliber player. Certainly not guaranteed to be a superstar by any stretch. But then you get to the upgrades, in my opinion, in the other two roles. We'll start with Viper because we already talked about him a bit. Going from an A-, in my opinion, in Elk, a player that I think is pretty underrated by the community as a whole, a player that I called the best AD carry in the world in 2024, to Viper. It just feels kind of ridiculous, the rich get richer. Elk had a bit of a down year, in my opinion, last year in comparison to the best that he's ever played. I still think he was good, and there were times where he was elite, but I don't think that consistency was necessarily there for him. Viper is the second best ADC in the world, in my opinion. He has the same exact grade as the best ADC in the world in Ruler. I think they're 1A, 1B in terms of what order you want to put them in. I prefer Ruler. I think he was better last year, but Viper's not far behind. Gumiyushi's in that conversation as well, but Viper immediately becomes the best AD carry in the LPL, and I think he's going to be a problem for other teams to deal with. Like I said, I think this 2v2 is going to be a bit of a nightmare to try and play against if you are any other team that isn't BLG, just because of how mechanically talented Viper is. He can hyper carry in the later parts of the game, but he's really going to want to generate resources, be strong side, and take over. He's always been kind of the prototypical strong side AD carry. I think this team is going to want to play for bot lane in the same way that they did in 2023 and 2024, and I'm excited to see that. And I think a big reason why I feel comfortable saying that they're going to do that is because they bring Shun back here into the jungle. This is an upgrade over whatever was in the jungle last year. You can list any of their junglers. I originally had Beichuan here. I switched to Shadow right before filming this. Whoever you want listed as the starting jungler for BLG, even Wei was here for obviously the beginning of last year. All of it, all of those players are good, but they're not Shun. He is genuinely a great player, and I think we saw that on JDG last year. He left the BLG system, and it really felt like, okay, well, are you going to sink or are you going to swim? I put a lot of faith in him. I said that he was a better jungler than Wei at the beginning of last year, and boy, did I receive a lot of hate comments for that. People did not like me planting my flag and saying that BLG was wrong for getting rid of Shun. I get that there was a lot of off-the-riff stuff. I'm not addressing that. I'm just saying I think Shun was better than Wei. People hated that. That turned out to be unequivocally true. Like, there is no argument that Shun is now better than Wei. That was definitely a take that aged incredibly well, and I'm glad this team brought him back. Is he perfect? No, he's a B+. He's not an A- or anything like that. I don't think he's a superstar. I think he can at times be selfish. I think he's at his best when he's playing fast and loose in the early game, but I think this is a team that kind of benefits from that style. Bin can be isolated on the top side and just use his mechanical advantages to generate leads in the 1v1. You can play with Knight. Those two had great chemistry and synergy together when they played as a mid-jungle duo, and once again, you have a bot lane that you can expect to be able to draft aggressively for and to utilize in the early game to generate tempo on the bottom side of the map. I think this is a perfect setup for Shun to kind of get back into that form that we were seeing in 2024 when this guy was awesome. Even in 2023 when this guy was awesome for BLG. So I'm really excited about this team. I definitely think they're better than what they were last year. This was a team that kind of surprised a lot of people winning the LPL. I was not one of the people that it surprised. I think by the end, people were expecting them to win, but, you know, this jungle situation was a nightmare throughout a majority of the year, and I think they really stabilized some of their weakest points. I expect another great year from Knight, and if you get better versions of players like Bin and On than you did in 2025, all of a sudden you're looking at a 2026 version of BLG that can not only compete once again to win the LPL, but a team that can actually compete internationally, unlike last year. But then moving on to our second team and our second seed from last year, the team that maybe even performed the best at Worlds in terms of what a lot of people's expectations were, an org that I have been very happy for in the past and continue to be happy for now. It's Anyone's Legend that, of course, was the 2 seed last year, even though they didn't make the finals. All of that was very funny, and how it ended up breaking down. You know, championship points are a fickle beast. Not that I think it's wrong to have them, just, you know, funny how that works out. But this is, I believe, the only team in today's video that is not making any changes. That's running back their entire roster from 2025 again in 2026. And you know what? I can't blame them. They just had the best year in this organization's history. They have continuously failed over and over again to develop any sort of consistency or any sort of positive memories for this org, even going back to the Rogue Warriors days. And I think finally landing on something that turned out to be not only good, but great, like league winning levels of great. Like, of course you have to run that back. Now, people are going to be quick to note that there is a pretty big change on this roster with the coaching staff, you know, changing up. Tabe is no longer here, but I'm going to talk about why I think that there is some optimism that while it might matter, it might not matter as much as everybody thinks, and I'll kind of give my thoughts as to why that is. Their roster, of course, is still looking like Flandra in the top lane, Tarzan in the jungle, Shanks in the mid lane, Hope at AD carry, and Kyle at support. The best player and the face of the franchise right now is Tarzan in the jungle, and I'm going to get straight to it. Like, this is the reason why I'm not quite as worried as maybe other analysts or other people are about Tabe leaving this team. Not because I don't think Tabe had an impact on why they were able to win the league or be successful last year. I do think that there absolutely is the possibility, and quite frankly, I'm expecting a little bit of regression coming in from Anyone's Legend, but to say that they're going to fall off and all of a sudden become a bad team just completely betrays how good Tarzan is as a player. I've been pretty vocal on this channel about Tarzan being the player I'm the most biased towards, and it's always something I like to talk about when I feel like I have to bring up when I talk about him in the LPL here, is that he's my favorite player in the world. He's my favorite player of all time to watch. Tarzan really is like the guy for me, and you know, Anyone's Legend has been an org that I've kind of loosely supported on this channel for a long time, because for many years I was kind of, you know, calling for them. Oh, this is the year. This is the year. I liked the roster moves they were putting together. It always felt like they were close, and they just never were able to put together actual good years. And then my favorite player Tarzan joins this org, and all of a sudden things kind of rise for them. But I do want to be objective about who Tarzan is, and this is where it becomes funny, because now, somehow, some way, you go and look at my Worlds comments, I'm a Tarzan hater online, which is just awesome for me to receive as like a call out. Like, somehow I've become somebody that consistently underestimates Tarzan in the eyes of a lot of other people. I'm just kind of being honest about what he is as a player. He is pretty specific in his skill set. He is somebody who wants to play a little bit more aggressive in the early game, but he doesn't really want to do it in a greedy, resource-heavy way. He wants to be that aggressive facilitator. It's a very unique style. He really is the only top tier player in the world that plays this way. He wants to pick these more engage and facilitative style picks, but he wants to utilize them to skirmish constantly. We saw this originally on things like Zac and Sejuani from him back in the day. Maokai was a huge pick for Tarzan, where he would pick these tanks and he would just play so aggro in the early game because he knew he could get away with it. And as long as his laners are there to back him up, he's almost always going to have the combat power and the ability to fight in the mid game to be able to back it up. That's kind of transitioned in a meta that's not as good for those tanks into being a lot of play from Vi and Wukong and a lot of these more engage style champions. He's just really good in that role, and I think he's going to benefit a lot in this meta, generally where things are happening a little bit faster than maybe they did last year. So I think Tarzan's in a great spot, but I think what people generally just don't like remember, I don't know, and this is where I do get a little bit in the weeds, but as somebody who watches every single game of the LPL and has for years, people just forget about like the lulls in gameplay that players have sometimes. Tarzan will go weeks where he's like genuinely a bad player, and it's fine. You always know he's going to figure it out. You always know that he's going to be able to, you know, get back out there and, you know, step up when it matters and, you know, be able to put things out. But like, if you want to look at me and tell me that there weren't 2 or 3 weeks in both spring and summer where Tarzan was just losing anyone's legend games, like, you're lying. Like, you didn't watch those games. I promise you. Like, again, as somebody who's covered a lot, this guy will win you a lot of games, and he will be an MVP caliber player in their wins, and then there will be a good 3 or 4 best of 3s that he just completely sprints. Like, it just completely runs it down for, and that's what you have to love Tarzan for, right? Like, he's gonna take a lot of risks as a player. It means he falls as an A- because if he doesn't have the talent around him, his playstyle does not necessarily indicate a player that is going to look great on bad teams, but he is a floor raiser in terms of the way that he plays because he makes it so much easier for his laners to operate because he's pulling so many resources and so much aggro, and he's not a selfish player in terms of where he wants those resources to go. He's so good at generating resources for his laners that it just makes the game so much easier for them. So, you know, Tarzan is both a floor raiser and a floor lowerer in terms of his gameplay, but he ends up landing at around an A- for me. I think he's still an unbelievably valuable player, and trust me, Tarzan is likely the best jungler in the LPL, especially with Kanavi leaving. I don't think there's much of an argument for it anymore. There's nobody else that I would put in that same category, but like, if you want to sit there and pretend like Tarzan is good every game, like, I'm his biggest fan, I can't even give you that, right? Like, it's just not the case. Tarzan's going to have some bad performances every once in a while, but the reason that that matters is because he is the foundation for this team. Tarzan teams win, like they just have throughout his entire career. Wherever he goes, winning tends to follow, or at the least, you know, being competitive follows, whether that's obviously back on Griffin, notably when he first joined LNG and was able to make Worlds with that Icon mid-team, and obviously, that was kind of a weird conglomeration of players. The only time that wasn't true is when him and Doingby had negative chemistry playing together on LNG, but he goes to Weibo midway through the year after he gets scapegoated for LNG and ends up, you know, salvaging their season, getting them to finals. He goes to Anyone's Legend last year and makes it work. Like, I have a feeling Tarzan is going to make this team competitive basically on his own, as he's done for most teams in his career. The other player that I just really like here that's an A-caliber player to me is Kyle in the support position, and this, again, goes back to the idea of support grades just being a little bit inflated because, quite frankly, there just aren't a lot of supports in the LPL that I feel good about. In fact, you are seeing the only 2 supports. You've already seen in this video the only 2 supports that are graded above a B at any point in this video, and it just makes it a little bit tough. But Kyle, at the very least, is an incredibly smart player. Is he going to be inconsistent? Yes, supports in the LPL are inconsistent. It's why he's not an A. It's why he's not an A+, but Kyle was another player I really called my shot on in 2022, and that's really worked out for me. He's turned into everything I could have wanted him to be. He's kind of a jack of all trades. He's good at every part of the game, but he's especially good when he gets to play those engaged tanks and really just kind of frontline in those team fights. Again, a good laner, not a superstar laner, but certainly somebody that can generate resources for you, a good mid-game skirmisher, and a very good late-game team fighter. Being able to retain Kyle and Tarzan here, they're the core of AL. I think you can make do with other players, but they are the 2 you kind of had to bring back. I think the third best player on this team is clearly Flandra. They all have the same grade for me, and I'll kind of explain why, because I think the consistency is there for them. But Flandra, to me, has the next highest upside. He was weak side king last year, which I really didn't expect him to be for this AL team. I was a little bit worried about the fit when he came in, but instead of just being somebody that ended up playing all these off-meta, like carry top laners like he's kind of been known for throughout his career, he was the best tank player in the world for a majority of last year, which is just crazy to say about Flandra. He's not really ever been bad at tanks, but it's certainly not the thing that I think of when I think of him as as a player, but you wanted someone to play Scion or Ornn last year. He was the best in the world at that role, and it was really cool to see. Were there worse games when he actually had to step up and side lane a little bit more aggressively? Yeah, which was a little concerning, but again, the inconsistency isn't going to throw me away from making him a pretty highly rated player. B+ is still a very good grade here. I just think he has become a little bit more specialized. Maybe he can get back to being that more carry-oriented player this year. Hopefully it's not at the expense. If he can put everything together, he can be an MVP, like in this league. Obviously, we've known that. Vondro's been around for forever. I mean, I feel like this guy's been playing since like 2017 on Snake, but like Vondra is, a good player. Like, you're happy to have him, just not an A caliber player for me right now with the way that he performed last year. And then you get to the carry duo, Shanks and Hope. And this is where things, I think, get a little bit more interesting. Like, they have the same grade as Vondra, but I certainly don't feel as good about them. Shanks obviously is the off the Rift stuff. I don't talk about that on the channel. You can have your own opinion on it. But on the Rift, Shanks is fine until he's not, right? Like, this guy just decides at some points to be bad, and it's really frustrating. It doesn't really seem to be a champion pool thing. He can play control mages, even if he is a little bit better at the more aggressive, like, melee-oriented picks, as a lot of LPL mid laners kind of grow up to be. He just will have these stretches, especially at the end of the year, where it feels like he's burnt out. And this, I've talked about this on the channel before. He is kind of a player who peaks early in the year and then, like, progressively gets worse as the year goes along. That wasn't as much the case in 2025, because I think this team generally had a lot more motivation and was rounded well, but they didn't make the finals for a reason. I don't think Shanks was particularly good against Cream and Top Esports, and I think he needed to be better in that series. I'm just not sold on him being a top-tier mid laner. You watch him play, and he just has so many deficiencies in the way he plays the mid game, but because mid is so up in the air in the LPL, again, because there's so much turmoil around, like, the 2 to 4 range at all of these positions, if you want to tell me that Shanks is the second best mid laner behind Knight in the LPL, I kind of believe you. Like, it's just tough to fight against that, but am I guaranteeing you that that's going to be the case? No, I really am not. This is a guy who I think has been a little bit overrated for a bit of time, and I'm just kind of interested to see if he's able to keep up that momentum. I'm not saying he's a one-year wonder. He's had plenty of good moments in past years, in 2023 and 2024 on WE previously, and then, of course, in 2024 on Anyone's Legend when he first came over to this roster. But there are so many down points that I just need to see that consistency come through before I feel really good about Shanks as the second best mid laner in the LPL. And then there's Hope. Hope, to me, is like the definition of as good as the rest of his team, right? Like, he will be whatever his team is. Right now, that's pretty good. He was actually really good last year. I went back and rewatched a lot of tape for this video, as I always do. He was genuinely really good last year. It wasn't just the surrounding core. He was winning in lane. He was doing really well in team fights. He's just not a star player. Like, he's just not the kind of guy that has the, I'll take the ball and I'll carry the game. I'll be the hyper carry. I will take over. Like, he's just not that kind of guy. AL didn't really trust him with that role, but it's so funny how basically no matter what, if this team was going to win a game or a series, he was without question going to be the second best player on the Rift. Like, he was never the best player on the Rift. No matter who was the best player on the Rift, it was never Hope, but he was like always the second best player on the Rift, which I just think is such a funny role for him to land in, especially as an AD carry. I feel better about Hope going into this year than I do about Shanks, which I think is not a popular opinion, but just kind of where I've landed. I think AL has a lot of upside here, and I think the floor is honestly pretty high just because I think Tarzan and Kyle are so good. I can't really imagine a ton of teams having top-tier talent that are going to outperform what these two are going to do on their best days, and that means that I think this team is going to be competitive. Did they get weaker because Tabe's gone? Probably. He's the best coach in the world, and I think that that's become abundantly clear, but the reality of the situation is that if you're expecting this team to completely fall off because Tabe is gone, I think you're underestimating how much skill and talent there is on this team, and maybe it's just me, but I'm putting a lot of value in players like Tarzan to continue to keep this team elevated and to continue to keep them contenders. But then moving on to our third team of the video, and the team that inarguably did the best from a performance perspective at the World Championships this past year, and definitely deserves to be considered better than third place last year. It was Top Esports that obviously had a very weird run. They end up underperforming a ton in the spring split playoffs after being the #1 seed, and so they don't have the championship points to be that #2 seed. But this team is coming off of a semifinals run at the World Championships. They are coming off of being the best performing team from the LPL at Worlds. They made the finals domestically. This is a good team, and they had a lot going for them. Unfortunately, kind of with things out of their control, they really had to revamp a ton of their roster. I think they did a good job, and I actually really like the direction that Top Esports is going in for next year, instead of just saying, okay, well, we're losing Kanavi, we're losing, Jackie Love at the very least for the beginning of the year. let's completely go and get whatever, get good players that aren't phenomenal, get Jeje, go and get, a decent AD carry that's not a superstar, whatever you want to say, go get someone of Light's caliber, even though Light, probably wouldn't have joined this team, that kind of move. Instead of doing that, they're like, you know what, we have an opportunity here to kind of take a punt on some players that have shown a ridiculous amount of upside either in or out of our system. And, we're going to try and see if they can actually turn into some good players for the opportunity that they have available. So I'm excited to kind of talk about this top esports offseason because I really do like the idea and the process behind it. Their lineup, at least for winter split, and this is what I'm going to talk about first in this segment, is looking like 369 in the top lane, Nio in the jungle, Cream in the mid lane, Jackie at AD carry, and Feng Yue at support. The reason I say for winter, and the reason I have an asterisk next to JackeyLove and Hong's change here is because JackeyLove will be back at some point this year, or at the very least it's been claimed that JackeyLove will be back, that Jackie was picked up as a temporary replacement for JackeyLove who's taking some time off. We all know, and it's been very well documented, that he was having some major health problems, some hearing problems at the end of last year, and that it was likely he was going to take a ton of time off at the beginning of this year. It looks like he might only be doing that for winter for split number 1. He might even be back as early as split 2, but at the very least, he isn't going to be there at the start of the year. So I kind of wanted to talk about Jackie because I, at the very least, think that there is some conversation to have here, but I will mention JackeyLove as well. The upside of this team with JackeyLove is going to be the realistic thing that top esports fans are looking forward to. And then I have a similar thing for the support position because it's been rumored that Feng Yue is just going to be the starter here in the support position, that he is just going to be the guy moving forward. But there's also been talk that when JackeyLove comes back, if Feng Yue is not shown enough in that, small amount of time, that they could go back to Hong, who is also teamless right now. So I don't really know what's happening in the bot lane after split number 1, but I can tell you pretty much for certain that in split number 1, it will be Jackie and Feng Yue in the bot lane. And we'll talk about that first because, again, it's just kind of an interesting conversation to have. I know we typically talk about the no changes, but I think this is kind of the most important part of this team, and it's definitely the most delicate situation when it comes to analyzing what top esports will be. Their floor is just so much lower in winter because your bot lane is 2 players that one of which is not, an LPL staple at all, and the other has only recently become somebody who has consistently been playing in the LPL, but I really like both of these players from a potential perspective. Jackie is the player that more people are familiar with in terms of, LPL actual success. He's been on FPX, he's been on RNG. Unfortunately, those 2 organizations both go to the grave, and so he doesn't necessarily have the best track record there, but he's been good performance-wise on those teams. Do I think he's been exceptional? No. I think he's been a borderline B- to B kind of player, an inconsistently good starter, where I can see him, I'm glad that he has a shot. I think that there are a lot of teams that would prefer to have Jackie to the 80 carries that they actually have, even teams that are pretty good going into 2026, but I don't think he's a superstar. I don't think he's necessarily shown the upside for me to believe that he's ever going to be a superstar. The mechanics are just not necessarily elite, and that's kind of what you need to have in order to really feel like an ADC that can kind of rise into that top, 3 or 4 kind of category. But if you want to ask him to be, a B or even a B+ caliber player this year, I think that that's possible for him. I just think it's unlikely in terms of how things are breaking down. I think he is a good replacement for JackeyLove since he's going to be out for a little bit of time, but I certainly think they're going to be happy to get JackeyLove back at some point this year, as he's going to be one of their weak links, if not their weak link. And that kind of brings up Feng Yue, and it's weird to talk about the rookie first when you're going over a team like this, but this is a guy who the tape is awesome on him. Like he looks excellent as a tier 2 player coming up. I see why top esports feels so confident and comfortable to put a lot of faith into him. I really love the decision to promote him and not to bring Hong back, at least in the short term. I think if he is good enough to play at the tier 1 level, the upside that this guy gives you is kind of ridiculous. He is a really, really good prospect, the best support prospect in China right now, in my opinion. And so I'm just excited to see what he ends up being. I'm giving him a B- grade because I think there is a floor here. Again, he is a decently risky player, but he does a lot of the little things really well, and I think he has a good mind for the game. If they can survive in the 2v2, like if their mechanics are good enough to go up against a lot of the other LPL bot lanes, I think they're going to be just fine moving forward. I really like what I saw out of Feng Yue, and I would be surprised if he is not at the very least competent at the next level, and I could see a world where this bot lane, even in split 1, is pretty good, and then once JackeyLove comes back, I could see a world where this bot lane is top 3 in the league easy, like top 2 or top 3, like bare minimum, if everything ends up working out for them. So I have these both listed as changes. I mean, it's not really a change in the AD carry role. JackeyLove is expected to come back. The Hong to Feng Yue thing, like, is Hong more established? Yes. But does Hong kind of give you a ceiling like most other LPL supports? Yes. I think Feng Yue is one of the few prospects that I've seen in the past couple of years that I think could genuinely increase your ceiling from the support position if he does end up landing. I think it is likely that this is a good move. I would have made this move as well as the organization, and I'm glad they promoted him and didn't just kind of stick to their guns. Again, I think it would have been really easy for them to just pick up a bunch of veterans and to try to compete to go to Worlds Worlds again, but to invest in their, you know, into young players. We're not done. We'll talk about Nio as well, who's coming over from Ninjas in Pyjamas, of course, has been a part of this top esports system before, but like to invest in these players that aren't quite as proven but have a ton of upside, I think is the right call. We'll get to Nio now. We'll get to the retentions last, I guess. Here it's kind of out of order for how I usually do it, but we can get into it. Nio is a really interesting player to try and analyze because he's only ever been the main character on every team that he's played for, really, at any phase. The only time that wasn't entirely the case was on Ultra Prime last year when things weren't necessarily going well. He ends up getting benched for Xiaohao, and Xiaohao's a very good player, and so the team kind of got better. Never really got the opportunity to really settle in for a team where he had to play with Vikla. Certainly not a great opportunity, but he found an opportunity on Ninjas in Pyjamas last year as a replacement for Aki midway through the year, and he came in and really revitalized that team. I mean, he was awesome down the stretch. I honestly don't know if he got enough credit for how good he was as a carry for that Ninjas in Pyjamas team. The question is, can he do that at a higher level? I mean, obviously, this is a former LDL MVP for Top Esports Challengers team. Like, this is a guy who's been in this system and was a really highly touted prospect, and he has shown the flashes that you want to see at the pro level, at the tier 1 level. I think we've seen everything that I need to see to feel comfortable with him being selected as the starter here for Top Esports, but there's always just going to be inherently some risk. I am giving him a B grade. I feel pretty confident that he's at the very least going to be a good starter for this team. I think there's a non-zero chance that this guy breaks out and has like a 2023 Shun kind of year and just becomes a really good jungler at this level, like a top, 2 to 3 jungler in the LPL. I certainly don't think that there's like a 0% chance that that happens. I think that there is an opportunity for him to really utilize his mechanical skill and his carry ability to become, what Tien was for Top Esports for a little while, a couple of years ago. Like, I think he's a pretty comparable player in terms of playstyle. The reason that this is listed as a downgrade is not because I think Nio is bad process, but rather you're always going to downgrade going from Kanavi to basically anybody. Kanavi was incredible last year. I still don't think he gets enough credit for just how important he was to Top Esports. He was the best player on this team. He was the reason that they were successful both in the regular season and in the playoffs, and I think Hanwha Life really won by being able to pick him up, as I talked about in my LCK video. I think there's almost nobody that you'd be able to put here that it wouldn't be a downgrade. It'd be like Tarzan, and that's it, because it's not whether or not Nio is going to be a good player. Do I think Nio is going to be as good as Kanavi was in 2025 year 1? I just can't say that that's going to happen. Like, that would be a miracle outcome for Top Esports if they get a Kanavi-esque MVP performance from Nio year 1. But process-wise, if you were always going to lose Kanavi, which it felt like they were always losing Kanavi to the LCK, then it's a great, pickup. I think Nio is one of the best replacement options you could have gotten because of the upside here. I think Nio and Feng Yue are really great additions, especially once Jackie Love comes back. But you still have 369 and Cream on this team. I don't think either of them were exceptionally good in 2025. Cream was better than people gave him credit for. People just shit on this guy regularly. I don't think there's any, real difference in gameplay quality between Cream and Shanks. I don't know if that's a hot take. I don't know if that's a controversial opinion, but watching them play, it doesn't really feel like there is a gigantic skill gap between the two. Cream was definitely better than Shanks in the playoffs for what it's worth, and so, I'm going to kind of put it out there that I think Cream has just as good of an argument as anybody to be the second best mid laner in the LPL right now, because that's just how open that conversation is. We'll get to more players, or one more player who can be in that conversation later, but actually, it's 2 more players, but, Cream's fine. He's an assassin player. He's definitely more comfortable when he plays things that are more aggressive. He's gotten better at control mages, though. People like to make it out like he can't play them. He's just not a B+ on control mages. He's probably closer to a B or a B-, but he's probably like a B+ to an A- when he gets Akali or when he gets Silas. He's just so good on those champions, and you can't ban them out every single game, because then you're giving Nio free passes in the jungle. You're giving, Jackie Love last year got a lot of free stuff because they had to ban out Cream's champions, and so he ends up actually kind of being an asset in draft to his team because he's so limited. He pulls bans away from other members of the roster, which I think is generally good. I just think Cream is fine. He's never going to be a star, but I don't think he's nearly as bad as some LPL fans would make him out to be. I think the tape generally is inconsistent, but good luck finding a consistent mid laner in the LPL that isn't Knight. Truly, do your best. And then 369, I think he had a pretty weak year last year, all things considered. I just really wasn't all that impressed with the tape, especially going back and rewatching it. He's fine on weak side. I think I'm always underwhelmed by how he plays at the end of the year. He was great at Worlds. I think that is a really good, encouraging trait. A lot of this team was really good at Worlds. I think 369 was good at Worlds. I think Kanavi was great at Worlds. Unfortunately, Kanavi not coming back. But, if you're getting that version, he's been a pretty steady A-, B+ in these rankings every single year for the entire time that my channel has been up. He's good on weak side, he's good as a carry, he can really do whatever you want. There are very few top laners I'd rather have than 369, but he's not a game breaker. Like, he's not an A caliber player for me right now. I think he's like the definition of a B+. You know you're going to get overall a good performance from him, and you're going to feel good about him as a starting top laner, but he's not going to win MVP. Like, he's not that kind of player. It doesn't seem like he has that kind of upside anymore. So how do I feel about top esports? In the short term, I'm not sure that it's going to be enough, right? Like, losing Kanavi is just too much, and, you know, winter doesn't matter. If Jackie Love comes back for spring, you're probably going to have enough championship points to at the very least compete to go to Worlds, and you're going to be a team that's around that area. We'll talk about the upside in a second, but the floor here is that they're like the 6th or 7th best team in the LPL, which is definitely disappointing for a team coming off a semifinals run. But in terms of the circumstances that they had available to them, I don't really know if you can do much better than what they did from a process perspective. I love the additions of Nayo and Feng Yue. I love that they're investing into young players that have really high ceilings. Maybe it doesn't work, but maybe it does. Maybe these players hit. Maybe Nayo's an MVP caliber player, and Feng Yue is like one of the best supports in the league because, again, support is super weak outside of the top 2 guys, and even they are inconsistent. Like, there is a world here where these players come in and actually are difference makers day one, and this team is competing for another title. And if you're able to do that while also losing a couple of your best players for the start of the year, that's a massive, massive success for top esports. But then moving on to our 4th and final Worlds team from 2025. If you want to consider them a Worlds team, losing in the play-ins definitely still counts. It's the team with the most tumultuous offseason of any team in the world. It was Invictus Gaming. What a weird offseason for this team. If you've not been following the rumor mill and how things have been going down this offseason, this team had a plan. That plan got thrown into a million pieces. It looked like they were actually going to be landing in a really good spot. That spot turned out to be fake, and then everybody backed out. Now all of a sudden they have a team full of players that I have no clue how this team is going to perform. You've gone from a team that was clearly a top 3 team in the LPL, at least in terms of what the rumors were, to a team that is probably nowhere close to going to Worlds and kind of needs a miracle performance or perhaps some mid-season roster changes in order to figure out what they are going to be. There are moves here that I'm okay with in terms of what the expectation is. There are moves here that I'm not okay with in terms of what the expectation is here, and I'll kind of go over which is which. Really, there's only, you know, 1 or 2 here that I'm really not all that excited about, but we'll talk about it now. Their lineup, at least rumored for 2026, is looking like Sobero in the top lane, Wei in the jungle, Rookie in the mid lane, Photic at AD carry, and Jue at support. This was not the plan. I cannot stress that enough. Again, I'll kind of recap a bit of the rumor mill for those of you who maybe weren't following along. They always were going to get rid of Gala. It looked like they were fighting to keep him, but he was always going to leave. It never really felt like he wanted to stick around. And Mako, as far as I'm aware, re-signed with this team. He's still here, and the intention was for this roster to be Breathe, Wei, Rookie, Doggo, and then Mako. Like, that was always the intention, that was going to be the plan moving forward. Originally, Mako re-signed because it looked like Invictus was going to be the team to get Elk. After BLG went and got Viper, and you know, Elk now needed a team, it looked like that was going to be IG. Once that didn't work, it looked like it was going to be Doggo, and Mako would still continue to play, but then Doggo's like, nah, I'm good. I'm going to stay in the LCP. That looked like a fake rumor the entire time. And the moment they're like, well, every other AD carry's gone. We don't necessarily have anyone we can pick up. Photic is the only one with any experience, and we'll talk about it. I hate this decision. But Mako's like, screw this. Like, I'm not playing. I was going to take a break anyways, and if I have to play with Photic as an AD carry, I'd much rather just not do that. So now Mako is out. You no longer have an AD carry. Breathe looks at this team with Photic and whoever. They didn't have anybody in the bot lane at that point, but looks at a team with no AD carry and with Wei in the jungle, and he's like, I'm out. I don't want to play here. I'd much rather sit and break. And so they have to go and get Sobero from the LCK Challengers League. Like, every bit of thing that could happen for IAG this offseason kind of went in the wrong direction, and I don't blame them. It just kind of was unfortunate that Elk decided not to sign with this team, because if Elk chooses IAG over Weibo, and we'll talk about Weibo in a bit, like, the entire offseason is entirely different for this team. They are genuinely probably Breathe, Rookie, or Breathe, Wei, Rookie, Elk, Mako, like, at least from what the rumors say. So kind of insane that we were that close to that roster. But talking about what they actually have, Rookie and Wei are kind of the core here. Rookie is definitely the franchise player of IG. It's crazy how things never change. You know, he comes back to this organization and immediately becomes their franchise player again. Rookie was good last year, really good last year. I think that he was probably the leader in terms of an argument for the second best mid laner in the LPL. Throughout a majority of last year, he had some inconsistencies, but especially towards the end of the year, I think he really started to lock in. He was a big reason why this team ended up making it to Worlds, and I thought he was great in the playoffs. Fortunately, it didn't really matter. I think this team could have done fine at Worlds had they had the chance to play in Swiss, but that's not how the format goes. They get, you know, blasted by T1, the eventual world champions in the play-in stage, and they just kind of have to deal with it. So, you know, I feel bad, but Rookie, I think, is the one player on this team from last year that I feel great about moving forward, Gala as well, which we will talk about a little bit later when we get to JD Gaming. But Rookie is definitely the player you needed to keep and needed to build around. And unfortunately, that happened, both for good and for bad, which we will talk about. Wei is the other player returning from the 2025 roster. If you guys have followed the channel, you know that I've always been anti-Wei, going back to the RNG days. I just have not seen an elite player at any point throughout his career, and I think that has only kind of been proven to be correct on basically every stop he's been on. He just doesn't do anything at an elite level. He's a decently selfish player from a resources perspective, and he's not fast. He plays the game very slow, and I hate to say it, but like if there is a style that has been kind of killed from League of Legends, it's the resource-heavy, slow-paced team-fighting jungler. Like that just doesn't work anymore. You have to adapt and evolve your style, and we saw multiple times last year Wei just was not capable of doing that. Now, he's an okay skirmisher when he does end up going for it, but it's clearly a mentality problem. He just does not want to fight early, and if he's not going to do that, he's not going to be a productively good jungler. He's going to be fine. He's going to be the definition of a B-graded player, somebody you're okay with. There are worse junglers in the league, and he's going to do a good job of being able to enable someone like Rookie to play more aggressive in the mid game because he's not going to be, you know, kind of pushing those advantages himself, and Rookie is kind of free to roam because he's good in lane. They ended up making a pretty decent duo because of that, but does Wei inspire a ton of confidence to me as the second best player on this team, which he's not, by the way. He's the third best player on this team, but like if you're asking Wei to be a top 3 player on your team, does that inspire confidence that you're going to Worlds for me? No, it really, really does not. I think he's fine as a bring back here, but I would have been more excited about other options. The best move of the offseason here for them was the one that they made last and the one that they were kind of hesitant to make in the first place, and that's bringing Jui in the support position. I do believe it's going to be Jui. All signs point to this being Jui as the starting support, even though they re-signed Mako. Looks like Mako is taking time off, very similar to Jackie Love and Tien for Weibo Gaming, who are technically signed to their teams and could come back at any moment, but are just not playing at the very least for right now. But if Jui is your consolation prize, Jui has the best argument of anybody in the league to be the third best support right now. You're not hearing me incorrectly. That's where LPL supports are at. Like, Jui, a player that I really like. Like, I want to make clear, he is a very good support. He is somebody that is very active on the map. He has a really good understanding of engage angles. He is a really big playmaker. Like, he is somebody that I think could turn into a superstar support. The floor of Jui is not particularly high. We've seen him in some important games not play perfect. We've also seen him play, you know, really well in games that he needed to step up in, and he also had a ton of responsibility on that FPX team. Like, all of the stuff you want to say. Like, he deserves a lot of the credit that he gets, but if him, with his track record, having never played on an actually good team, is the third best support in the LPL, like, that's how open support is, and I think this as a consolation prize is absolutely massive. I still have this listed as a downgrade because Mako is Mako, even if I'm lower on what Mako's 2025 was as compared to a lot of other LPL analysts. I still think Mako last year was better than Jui, but could Jui be what Mako was last year? Easy. I think if you want to switch this to being a change, that's fair. I just think with the way that I kind of view this Invictus offseason, I kind of have to list all of these as downgrades in the short term just because of how things ended up breaking down. But Jui is about as good of a consolation prize as you can get. The fact that he almost was teamless because he didn't want to play for any of the bottom teams was really funny, but also it would have been a shame. This guy definitely needs to be playing in the LPL right now. He could be a future star. And then we'll skip Fodic for a second because, boy, I have a rant to go on, as I do every year with Fodic. But Sobero in the top lane, again, if I'm saying that correct, let me know. If I'm saying that incorrect, let me know. I watched this guy's tape in the Challengers League, and honestly, there's more than I expected to like there. This is obviously a player that played a little bit in the LCK last year. I covered him on the channel when we did the LCK weekly recaps when Clear got benched. He came in and played for FearX for a little bit, and he was fine. Was a complete non-factor in their game plan because that entire team played around Diablo. Like, he's the only player that exists on FearX in terms of, you know, how that team operates and how they want to play. Bot lane is the only thing that matters, and top lane was certainly weak side in terms of how they ended up playing when Sobero was in. But going to his Challengers League tape, this guy can carry games. He does have good mechanics and he has good lane instincts. He's really good at generating advantages and he's a good team fighter. All of those are valuable traits. Do I think he's a dominant, like, unbelievable prospect? No. Like, he wouldn't be in the LPL if he was one of those top lane prospects that looked like $1 million, right? Like, some LCK team would have picked him up. Hell, FearX would have promoted him if he was an absolute monster. They need a top laner and they let him go for a reason. But do I think that he has upside? Yeah. Like, I think there's something here. I think this team really would have preferred to have a player of Breed's caliber because I think it's unlikely that Sobero is that good year one, but I think he's like a relatively high floor player in comparison to a lot of other prospects because his skill set is pretty translatable. He gets the foundation, like, fundamental parts of League of Legends pretty well. Like, he just is a solid enough player some upside, not like a ridiculous amount of upside, but like I don't hate this as a consolation signing. I think things could have been much worse. The only other name that I heard that was up for debate for this spot was Solo Kill, that I know they kind of give a shot to, probably because of Rookie on this team, but they end up going with Sobero, and, you know, if they think Sobero is better than Solo Kill, that's a good endorsement of Sobero, because Solo Kill's a solid player who was good in the LPL last year, so I wouldn't be surprised if he came in and was like a middle-tier top laner day number 1. Good upside. Like, I like the punt, but it's a downgrade from the Shy. The Shy was the best top laner domestically last year, even if, you know, he is the Shy, and he's inconsistent, and it's hard to really kind of rank him as a player. He was my first team all-pro top laner in the summer split, so it's just hard to live up to that. I certainly don't think Sobero will be that year 1. Do I think he could eventually get there? Maybe. Like, I don't hate this signing. I don't think it's as good as Dway, but I certainly don't think it's as bad as Fodic. This one I just don't get. It's a Nepo signing. Like, it's as clear as it gets. Him and Rookie are pals. They're buds from their time on Victory 5 and then NIP. Like, it is clear that Rookie just kind of vouched for Fodic when they needed an AD carry. Fodic has proven over and over again that he is just not an LPL caliber ADC. Like, I get it. I really kicked off this channel in 2022 being a Fodic hater. Like, he was really the first player that I went to bat for being like, he's overrated. Like, I don't get it. I don't see it. And again, a take that I think aged pretty well from 2022. My older takes tend to age pretty well, it would seem. All he's done is get worse every year. And I'm not even going to say get worse. I think he was always bad. I think his flaws were just kind of hidden by the fact that he was playing with a lot of really good players that could generate free resources for him. Ever since he's been on teams that have been a little bit more mediocre, or God forbid last year he was actually on a bad team, like when he's not on a team that can give him free resources, he's like the worst player in the LPL. Like, he's not a playable AD carry. Going from Gala to Fodic is the biggest downgrade in this entire video, and I honestly don't get why they picked him. Again, it was an entirely nepotism type of choice here. Like, there's no other explanation, because even if you wanted to go the LDL route, like, there are LDL AD carries that I think would have given you a more interesting conversation to have here. A lot of BLG junior players are going to be playing in the LPL. Ultra Prime, or Thunder Talk, I should say, you know, goes and picks up the solo laners, and, you know, you've got a couple of other players that were, you know, Sorrow was kind of floated around as a name. Where is Chester? Chester was really good when I was watching LDL tape. Why is he not starting here? I would so much rather have a player of that quality or caliber, or hell, I'd rather have an import here in the AD carry role from the LCK Challengers League, whoever you could end up getting, and then Solo Kill on the top side so that, you know, you can still maintain residency rules. But like, I just don't get it. Like, I think you're handicapping your entire team with Fodic. I would actually kind of be excited for what the upside of this team looked like with Sobero, Wei, Rookie, and Dway if Fodic wasn't here. I just think you cannot be an actually good team with Fodic. Like, I think it's actually impossible. I hope they prove me wrong. I hope I'm not on the, you know, I hope that doesn't end up being the case, but as long as Fodic is here, like, this team is inherently going to be capped at being like the 6th or 7th best team in the LPL, and that's super frustrating for a team coming off of a Worlds appearance. I think they had the potential and the building blocks to be relevant. I think Dway is going to suffer, and his performances are going to look worse because of the AD carry situation, and again, I understand. Like, this was a last-minute decision. They had other options in mind, and they couldn't get any of them. They missed on all of the other targets, but this isn't even option D for me. This is like option X for me in terms of, you know, down the priority list. It wasn't something I would have gone with, and I think IG will suffer for it. I think there's talent on this team. Rookie's still very good, and Rookie's gotten the best out of Fodic before, but I just would bet against this team actually being good this year, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that I just don't think they have an AD carry that can compete. But then moving on to our 5th team of the video, and this 5th team had one unbelievable offseason. I think for a lot of people, they are going to be considered the winners of the LPL offseason. It's certainly up for debate. BLG for me just got so strong, but LGD Gaming come in pretty darn close. The team that came the closest to making Worlds but couldn't quite get the job done. They certainly don't want to miss Worlds in this upcoming year. I think it's very clear that there is a big 3 right now in the LPL, and JDG have very much cemented themselves as part of that, at least on paper, heading into 2026. Now, will they definitely be there? It's hard to tell because I don't know if they necessarily have a superstar. I think it's possible that they brought in a superstar in the mid lane here in Hongq, which we will talk about, but bringing over the stars from the Flying Oysters, the best modern team in LCP or PCS history, in that region's history, or at least in comparison to Flash Wolves, right? Like, it's 1A, 1B in terms of performance. They're the only 2 teams to ever make the quarterfinals of Worlds. This team did incredibly well at other international tournaments as well. It was a fantastic year for the Oysters. You take the middle core of that, you take Junjia and Hongq, and you put that into a team that, you know, you have a top laner that's relatively, you know, growable. You know, we'll talk about Xiaoshu. I think some people are a little bit too excited about him, but I'll talk about why top lane is, again, also just very weak. And then a bot lane that I think a lot of people have some excitement for, and you're looking at a team that genuinely has the upside to compete to win the entire league. Are they definitely going to be able to do that? It's so hard to say. There are more unknown variables on this team than there are on the top two in BLG and AL from my perspective, but I do think they're very much in that conversation. Their lineup in 2026 is looking like Xiaoshu in the top lane, Junjia in the jungle, Hongqiu in the mid lane, Gala at AD carry, and Vampire at support. Only one player being retained from last year's roster, and that, of course, is Xiaoshu on the top side. Definitely a weird year overall for JDG, but, of course, Xiaoshu coming in midway through the year as a replacement for Ala and kind of just being an upgrade. I was really critical of Ala throughout basically all of 2025. I just didn't think he was very good for this team on the top side. Of course, you know, off the riff stuff is not great for him as well, so it made sense for this team to move on. You know, the performance was not nearly good enough to justify him being the way that he was, but, like, Xiaoshu coming in was a bit of a surprise for me. This is a player that I've talked about a lot on this channel. I loved him in his rookie year. I was super in on this guy. I thought he was going to be the next breakout top laner. You know, him and Harry kind of broke out at the same time, and I was really anti-Harry and really pro Xiaoshu. Not that that was the most controversial take at the time, but I think a lot of people saw them very similarly. I very much kind of planted my flag in the Xiaoshu column. Never really had that payoff. He kind of bounced around from team to team. He spent quite a bit of time on Rare Atom. You know, he was on RNG before they ended up folding. And it never really looked all that good. It kind of felt, and I talked about this on the channel, like he kind of got worse year over year before he joined JDG, but it did feel like he finally got into a good environment where he could start to play the game that we knew he could play, and he was pretty good last year for JDG. Do I think he was excellent? That's probably a bit hyperbole. I don't think excellent is necessarily how I would describe Xiaoshu. I certainly think the B grade is accurate. He has inconsistently been a good starter, but there is a floor to this player that I think is lower than people maybe want to admit. If you were going to bring back a player from last year's JDG team, it certainly wouldn't have been top lane for me, although again, like the rest of this team kind of got pilfered. The two players you wanted to keep, you couldn't keep. Pays ends up going to T1. We've already talked about that. That is an excellent move, and trust me, there's already some controversial comments talking about the individual thing here between Pays and Gala, and I promise I will address that. And then, of course, Shun was attempted to be retained by JDG, but he ends up choosing BLG to play with Knight instead. So Xiaoshu was really the only other option. Top lane's super weak in the LPL, but if this were Breathe, I think I'd genuinely feel much better about this team. I'm not going to sit here and say that I would think that they're better than like BLG or favorites to win the title or anything. I just think there's a bit of a gap between the best teams and, like, you know, even a JDG. But I think I would be looking at this team a little bit better if Xiaoshu was not the top laner, because again, I just think there is a little bit of a floor here, but there is a ceiling. Like, he has always had the potential from a mechanics and a laning perspective to turn into one of the better top laners in the LPL, and he's going to have a chance to do that this year, not only because of the surrounding core, but because of the lack of consistent top lane talent at the LPL level. If he is a top 3 to 5 top laner in the league, JDG is going to be able to do everything that they want to do across this year, and I think that that's totally possible with a B grade. So even if I'm not the biggest fan of this move, right, like I would have wanted a more established top laner to come in here and really kind of round out a team that clearly wants to win now, I do think Xiaoshu has enough upside to justify taking on the risk of what his floor ends up looking like in this system. But let's talk about the Oyster Boys, Junjia and Hongqiu coming over from the LCP. This is a huge win for JDG. Honestly, this is a monumentally good move for this organization. I did not think that these guys were leaving the LCP. It really felt like Hongqiu was going to be the next big LCP superstar, the next player to come through kind of the mold of, you know, Maple and Karsa and Sword Art and all these other players that have had such illustrious careers. And following in the footsteps of all of those players, he does head over to the LPL, but he does so much earlier in his career than any other of those stars that we have talked about. He never really got like a full run outside of this year. He was not a rookie, but like essentially a rookie, you know, somebody who had never really been a front and center figure in the LCP before this year, and he was Rookie of the Year globally at the Esports Awards. I voted for that. I agree with that. I think he was the best rookie in esports this year. It truly was an incredible showcase for Hongqiu, and the potential is out of this world. Going back and watching him domestically, he is so much better than every mid laner in that region that it's actually absurd. Here's the question, man. Is Hongqiu the second best mid laner in the LPL day one? Like, can you tell me that he's not? Is he better than Rookie? Is he better than, you know, Cream and Shanks and Xiaohu? Like, that's the competition for second best right now in the LPL behind Knight. Hongq is just as good of an argument as anybody does for that, and he could definitely still get better. Again, he was a rookie this past year, and he's already showcased the ability to perform at a really high level. The only reason he's not coming in as an A-graded asset, first and foremost, he is an import, which means that, generally speaking, his value is just going to be a little bit lower than maybe players who don't take up an import tag. But more importantly, I just need to see him be able to do it in the LPL. So many players have dominated the LCP or the PCS or whatever, you know, that region has been called the LMS back in the day over the years, and not been able to translate that to strong LPL success. But I think that there is a difference between a lot of those players that, you know, were good at this level but weren't elite, and a player like Hongq who truly does show the mechanical upside to be one of the best mid laners in the world. If he was somebody that actively pushed this team forward and was the best player on a team that ended up making worlds from the LPL, I would not be surprised in year one. This is the biggest get they got this offseason. This is an upgrade over Scout. Scout was a nightmare for most of last year. He ended up making a ton of mental errors, and his mid games were basically unplayable. People who watched LGD Gaming will know acutely that it was the worst year of Scout's career. They needed to move on, and they felt comfortable moving on because they had a fantastic replacement in Hongq lined up. And then he's bringing Junjia along. Now, I love Junjia, another player that I really went to bat for in 2022 when he was playing for Edward Gaming, subbing in for Jeje for a little bit of time. He ended up really salvaging that team's season, if you don't remember, back in 2022, because not because he was like a perfect player, but because the style that he ended up playing really ignited EDG to play their best game plan, which was play around Viper. Like, Jeje was spending so much time with Scout in the mid lane and was giving him so many resources, and Viper was kind of just on his own winning in the bot lane and not really able to dominate or affect the game in a major way. Junjia came in and said, what if I put all of my pressure into the bot lane and gave Viper everything we have, and then all of a sudden that team fixed? He's a really smart player is the point I'm trying to make, and he has carried that through to the LCP. He has always been great at identifying the strong point of the map and being able to attack it, and more importantly, he's been able to, I guess, grow as a facilitator and grow as somebody who's been able to get resources for other laners. He is a good carry. He can play a lot of these more aggressive picks, but when you're looking at Junjia at his best, it's almost always going to be as a, you know, setup man for other players on the team. It's why Hongq, I think, looked so good for a majority of the year. Having Junjia as your jungler is going to make you better. The only reason he comes in as a B and not a B+ is, again, because I think the level of competition is just going up. The tape is probably Hongq at A- and Junjia at B+, and like, you're looking at some of the best players in the entire league on this team, but I just need to see it in the LPL before I believe it, because it's the transition between those leagues has just not gone well for so many players, and I don't want to sit here and plant my flag and say it's definitely going to be a positive change for these two players. There is a chance they come in and dominate day number one and look like, you know, one of, if not the best jungle mid duo in the entire league, and I think there's equally as good of a chance that they're good year one, but maybe aren't dominant in the same kind of way that maybe you're expecting. Both of those outcomes, I think, are possible. If I had to bet, I'm leaning on the side of them being great. I would honestly expect them to be great more than I would expect them to be bad, but, you know, I don't want to rank that as such. That is a biased, like, you know, soul read kind of opinion. It's not necessarily a logical take. I think the logical take is to say there are a lot of avenues that this mid-jungle duo can go. They're going to be good no matter what. I would be shocked if their floor is lower than being a top 5 jungle mid-duo in the league, but if you want them to be elite, I just need to see it first in the LPL. And then the bot lane here. This is where things, I think, get spicy. People have already commented, I'm sure, about me calling Gala a downgrade to Pays and me giving him a B+ grade. Gala is such a funny player to talk about because I don't want to use this term. If you guys are fans of the channel, you know I'm not calling out, you know, the fans of the channel. You guys have an idea of who I'm talking about. The hypocrisy surrounding Gala, I just think is so funny. Like, just the general vibe talking about him, I think, is so hilarious, because for 75% of 2025, as a caster, as somebody who was talking about the league every single week on this channel and interacting with, you know, general LPL fans, people hated Gala. For most of last year, they were talking about how he was inting team fights. They were talking about how he was running down laning phase, how he was holding IG back. Even when I was defending him in the spring split, I was seeing so much online, and I was even getting comments on this channel about how you're overrating Gala. Gala's been terrible. They need to replace him. IG can't win with Gala. 75% of the year was spent with that narrative surrounding this player. And then summer comes along and the team starts doing better. I wouldn't even really say that Gala's performances changed all that much, because I thought he was good and genuinely was winning games for them before that anyways, but his performances don't even really change all that much. The team starts winning more. Now all of a sudden Gala is one of the best AD carries in the world. He's the best AD carry in the LPL. Everything is kind of swung in the other direction. I have people telling me in my top 20 players at Worlds video that it's a crime that I don't have Gala in there because I have Gumayushi and I have Viper and I have, you know, Elk and players of that quality. How can you have those those players and not Gala, and it just feels like I'm in some sort of Twilight Zone where I spent the entire year defending Gala and talking about how it was ridiculous that the community was tearing him down, and then randomly in October, everybody just decided to do a complete 180 communications-wise. My thoughts on Gala haven't changed. He is the definition of a B+, at least right now. I've put him as an A- in the past, but I don't think he played like an A- last year. I think the team fighting looks really good until it doesn't. There are a couple of games that you can point out that are just really inconsistent. Very similar argument to what I made for Tarzan before, where it's very clear that most people just don't watch every LPL game. Not that I'm expecting people to, that's what this channel is for. But for those of you who don't watch every LPL game, boy, were there a lot of games that Gala lost for his team. His positioning was terrible, where he would step up and get caught in team fights, like actively make game-losing decisions in tied even games. And I can't just throw out that tape. But yes, when he steps up, it looks fantastic. And that's why I understand where you all are coming from and why there are so many comments that talk about Gala as being one of the most underrated players in the world. I have to land somewhere in the middle. And if you're genuinely asking me, would I rather have Pays or would I rather have Gala? I'd much rather have Pays. The mechanical ceiling is just higher. You can talk about how Gala has a slightly more well-rounded skill set, but Pays is a better team fighter, and that's Gala's strength. I think Gala is a much better weak side player in terms of lane if you want to try and play for other lanes, which is what this team is going to want to do. But Pays as a strong side player shouldn't be penalized because he's not a better weak side player than Gala. To me, it doesn't really track like that. If you want to say this is me calling my shot, then go for it, man. It's me calling my shot. Pays will be better than Gala this year. Pays will be better on T1 than Gala is on JDG, and I think this team will have preferred to have Pays. Obviously, they didn't have a choice, and I think Gala is a fantastic decision. You know, the ability to get Gala, I think, is huge for this team, but this is a downgrade in my opinion, and I know that's not going to be popular. I know people aren't going to like that in the comments of this, but it's my honest, authentic opinion on what direction this team went in. I think you are probably going to get a similar output from Gala to what you got towards the end of the year from Pays, which is a really good AD carry that just isn't super consistent, but I do think Pays' ceiling is higher individually as a player than what he showed at the end of last year. That's my conversation about this. Again, if you want to disagree with me, please, down in the comments. It helps engagement. It's really good for the video, but definitely not going to change my opinion because of that. And then there's the support position, and this is the funniest conversation to have. Vampire's coming in here, and this is an upgrade. Vampire is better than Zhuo, who we'll talk about a little bit later in the video, but how did we get here? How did we get to the point where Vampire is getting a B grade after being a player that I think looked like a nightmare, being thrust into a position that he was not prepared for in 2024 on Edward Gaming, and then moving over to Invictus and, you know, getting traded and not looking good in that situation either. A lot of people hyping up some of his moments, but please go and watch 2024 Viper and tell me that that player is who he was in 2025. It's just not the same player. And then he starts to show moments, especially towards the end of last year, where it feels like he is figuring things out. This was a kid that was thrown into the deep end as a last-minute replacement for Mako on EDG when he ends up going to Top Esports because that team thought they were going to have him. You know, I don't blame him for not being good day number one. He had no comp experience before that, but he's grown into a decent player. And with the support pool right now in the LPL, again, B grade on Vampire, is he the fourth best support in the LPL? Like, are we genuinely there? It's him and Jue fighting it out for top 3. Like, what has happened to this position? It's just ridiculous how crazy it is, at least in my opinion. You know, some people are going to throw other names out there like Missing or whatever, but I don't think anybody who watched this team last year would put Missing in that conversation. Vampire is an upgrade to anything that this team had. Juo's a C+, I think Missing somewhere, you know, we'll see later on in the video. Wink was the worst for this team, even if I think he's probably individually the best of those players. It was just a weird year for this nightmare support position. Vampire at least offers you upside. Again, there is a floor there, but I've liked Vampire's development, and I think this is a better gamble to take than Xiaoshu on the top side. I think his tape is more encouraging. His development track, I think, is more encouraging than Xiaoshu's. And so overall, I think this is a top 3 team in the LPL. I know I've kind of talked down on them, but I don't think the LPL got better in the offseason. I don't think this is a league that is particularly deep or solidified near the top. And I think you're looking at a mid-jungle duo that could be one of the best in the league. I think you're looking at a player in Gala who's almost always going to be competitive enough to try and win the LPL, even if he's not a star, in my opinion. And then Xiaoshu and Vampire are at the very least interesting punts to take. I like the Vampire signing, again, just because of how weak support is. I think he's one of the better options available. And if Xiaoshu can just be stable on the top side, especially if he can continue to win 1v1 like he was doing at the end of last year, you're looking at a really strong team that actually has real upside. It's just mostly going to come down to Junji and Hongkyu. And at least for me, I'm kind of feeling good about that, but it's cool to see that the Oysters, or at least the core of the Oysters, are going to get their shot here in the LPL with Junji and Hongkyu having the chance to be front runners on a Worlds team. Then moving on to our 6th team to talk about in today's video, and this is an interesting one. This is a team that I think is sneaky kind of good, and I really like their offseason. It's Weibo Gaming. I actually really like the direction that this org is heading in. I think that they're going to be better this year than a lot of people are expecting them to be, and I really like this team. I'm not sure if that's a popular opinion. I think they're going to be top 4, at least on paper right now. You know, with top esports, you never really know what's going to happen when Jackie Love comes back, but I really think you're looking at a team that's competitive and that made some really good moves this offseason and went in the right direction, in my opinion. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Their lineup is looking like Zika in the top lane, Jeje in the jungle, Xiaohu in the mid lane, LGD carry, and Erha at support. No change, although they wanted it to be 2. Tien is technically still under contract here for Weibo, but as we've talked about with a couple of other players, he is not playing split number 1. Same thing for Crisp. He's also here. I don't think they wanted to play Crisp. I have both of them with asterisks in this video for the change, because technically Tien and Crisp could come back in at any point if they really wanted to do that. I think Tien would be a slight upgrade in the jungle, although not a huge one. And I think Crisp probably gives you a higher ceiling in the support position, but probably a lower floor, so it's kind of up to you how you want to describe that. Everything else here, I like. And even the decisions they did make, I like. I like some of these players a little bit more than others. We'll talk about the one retention, technically, from last year, that being Xiaohu in the mid lane. I continue to, be a Xiaohu defender on this channel. It feels like every year people are talking about him as if this guy's washed and that he can't play anymore. There's no difference between him and every other LPL player that people glaze randomly at any given time, where he'll be absolutely terrible in his worst games and he'll be great in his best ones. Like, it's just the way that players work in the LPL. It's like, I don't understand people glazing Gala and then shitting on Xiaohu. Like, it just does not make sense to me. They're basically the same player in different roles. They're going to be awesome in the games they win, and they're going to look terrible in the games that they lose. And it just is the way that it is. And Xiaohu, I think, doesn't get enough credit for how much he elevates the talent around him. I think as a laner, he's not necessarily good. I wouldn't even call him average at times. He's probably slightly below average as a 1v1 laner. And when you look at his stats, that's probably why a lot of people are kind of a little bit lower, we'll just say, on Xiaohu. But the eye test in team fights and really the impact that he's able to have from neutral game states, if he's like relatively in the game from a gold perspective, it's near the top of the entire league from any position. If he were even average at being able to generate resources at this stage of his career, he'd be an A caliber player with the way that he's able to play from neutral, but he just doesn't get there all that frequently. He's almost always down in gold going into the later part of the game, and that's just tough. It's tough to be a good player from that perspective, but he's just a very specialized player. I don't think he's infinitely worse than a Cream or Shanks or a Rookie, anybody else that's going to kind of be in that same zone. I think he had a really good argument for being the 2nd or 3rd best mid laner last year in the LPL in terms of overall performance. He won quite a few games from Weibo. He lost quite a few games for Weibo. But again, if you're not picking up on the trend, that happens a lot in the LPL. So I'm going to cut him a little bit of slack. I like bringing him back. There aren't a lot of better mid lane options available here. Everybody else on this team has changed. I will say the one kind of pseudo retention here is going to be Erha coming in as the starting support. He, of course, played quite a bit last year for this Weibo team. When they originally had Hong on the roster, they benched Hong for Erha. They go out and pick up Chris from Top Esports for the summer split and go with Crisp the rest of the way. Erha getting a full chance to start here now with a better AD carry we'll just talk about a little bit later. I'm interested to see what he ends up being. It's really funny because I think since he's a rookie, a lot of people see like an upside tag on him. But when you watch him play, it's really hard to see like progressionable upside. And I know that's a weird thing to say, but it's kind of my job to analyze where I think players could go. That's why a lot of people come to this channel. And quite frankly, Crisp is always going to have better best games than Erha, because Crisp's engage angles are significantly more creative. He takes significantly more risks in game. Erha still takes risks, and he is a player that is going to be a playmaker, but he's much more stable. I think Erha is the high floor, low ceiling option in the support position for this team. And I'm totally fine with them going for that. I think you have a more aggressive AD carry now, which is going to be better for this team in terms of playing off of that. I think when you had someone like Light, who is a lot more passive in the way that he played the 2v2, you were just in a position where I think Erha had to do more than he probably wanted to or felt comfortable doing as a player. I think Elk is going to offer a little bit of reprieve from that role, and I think Erha will benefit from that. But do I think Erha's great? I don't know. I don't think he's ever going to be like a contender for one of the best supports in the league, although maybe he could be, again, because support is so weak, but he really is like the high floor, low ceiling kind of player. Like, he reminds me a lot of Hong. Like, and I know people don't want to hear that, but I think they're very similar players in terms of the way they play. Maybe not so much 2025 Hong, but like think of 2023 Hong, like think of like FPX Hong. I think that's a really great example for what Erha could be as a player at his absolute best. If you want like an actual comparison, even Rare Adam Hong, I think that's another, that era of Hong as a player, I think is a really good example of what Erha could turn into in a best case scenario. And then on the top side here, you're bringing in Zika from LNG. Talk about the player who was the most trapped last year in the LPL. I don't think there's any sort of competition. Zika is one of the best top laners in the LPL, and he was on one of the worst teams in the league last year because there's only so much you can do. By the end of the year, he was still carrying games for the team because even at his worst, he is, really good, but it was clear he was mental, boomed out of his mind. Getting him out of that system and onto Weibo, this to me has the chance to be an upgrade over Breathe. I like Breathe. I think he's a very interesting player. Again, high highs, low lows. Generally speaking, it's just how the LPL goes. I think Zika has the potential to just be a great top laner. Like maybe not an A-, but like a clear B+. Like he has the potential to be what 369 has been for so many years. If you can just get him into a spot where he can actually feel comfortable not having to do everything for the team as a top laner. When he was on good LNG teams, I think he was making some really nice progress, and I was waiting for that big breakout year, and it just never happened because that team imploded. This could be that year. I think he's a really great pickup. I think there's a chance this is even better as an upgrade here, and I agree with the organization's decision to look at a player like Zika and say, we can pick him up and we can invest into him and it's going to work out for us. So excited to see that change come in. It's still just a change because Breathe was obviously way better last year than Zika was, but I think situationally I'm expecting this to be fine. And same thing in the jungle. I continue to be a Jeja defender when it doesn't really feel like there are a lot of them left. I was kind of pounding the table for him as one of the best players on IG at the beginning of last year, and boy, that was not a popular opinion. I remember it was Jeja and Gala that I was going to bat for. I was consistently talking about how Mako and Rookie were sprinting, like completely sprinting in the spring split, and they were. Go back and watch those games. Mako and Rookie were sprinting in the spring split, and then everything flipped in the summer split, where it felt like Gala was kind of playing the same, except now Mako's playing well, and Rookie's playing a lot better, and Jeja obviously gets replaced, which I did not agree with. I was very vocal about not agreeing with. He doesn't really get a good run on FPX. That team is kind of a disaster. When you have to play with Care as your mid laner, it's just tough. It's tough to win games. I'm going to be entirely frank with you. That was not a good team environment for him, and he was kind of put into a bad position. I think he only got like 3 weeks of prep time before he went into the playoffs, and it just didn't work out. I still think there's a lot of good left for Jeja. I certainly don't think he's washed by any means. I think the confidence meter is a little bit lower. It's why he's a B and not a B+. Same thing for Zika. Same thing for Erha. These are players that I think could be really solid, but could also be a little bit weaker. Like the consistency is just not there. But I don't know, man. Like the LPL is not strong. Like if you've got if your weak link is a B, even in worst case scenarios, that team's going to be competing to go to Worlds. And so I should probably get to Elk, huh? I did this whole segment and then I realized I didn't even talk about him, so I'm putting this part in. Elk's awesome. He's the best player on this team. This is like the true upgrade. I skipped over him, I guess, mentally because I just kind of assumed that I already mentioned him with the bot lane, but Elk is the guy on this team. What a great pickup for Weibo. I don't think he's coming off the best year of his career. 2024 is definitely the best year that he's ever had. He was so much better in 2024 than people give him credit for. I've actually seen some comments that I really want to push back on and really, really want to disagree with. The main one being that, oh, Elk has just not been good enough in big moments. BLG wanted to go to a different AD carry that could be better in big moments. What are we talking? Did anyone else watch 2024 Worlds? Am I the only one who watched that tournament? That guy single-handedly beat Hanwha Life Esports in the quarterfinals. He outplayed Viper in an AD carry duel where both of them were playing out of their mind and was a little bit better to the point where he got his team into the semis, and he was one of the better players in the finals. They just ran into Faker's Galio, right? Like, he was excellent in that World Championship run, arguably the best player at the tournament, full send. And somehow he's not good enough in big moments. I just don't really understand the narrative. It's fake. It's a completely fictitious narrative. If you hear that on the internet, laugh and scoff at it because it's just not true. This is a huge pickup for a Weibo Gaming team that needed an X factor. There is a chance that Elk getting out of the BLG system, not getting to play with players like Knight anymore, makes him worse and, makes his impact on the game worse. But one of the things that he's so good at is generating resources in the 2v2 and being really aggressive in the early game. There's no reason that should change going to a different team. If he can still generate resources, then he's still going to be really valuable. He is probably the most mechanically talented ADC in the region. He's certainly up there, and he's definitely the most aggressive, and I think that often is just going to be positive. The only worry that I have is that you're looking at a team of Jeja and Xiaohu, and you're looking at players that are generally a little bit slower in terms of the way that they operate. Xiaohu in particular doesn't really want to be aggressive early. That could mean that Elk could be at a bit of a playstyle disadvantage on this team and might have to shift up his style a little bit, but The more realistic version of that, in my opinion, is that Xiaohu kind of gets a lot of pressure taken away from him early on in the mid lane because you can play for Elk on the bot side or you can play for Zika on the top side, and Jeja actually gets to be a bit more free with the way that he pats in the early game because these lanes are going to have more consistent leads, at least top and bot. So overall, I really like this offseason for Weibo Gaming. I really don't have a lot of negative things to say. I think that there were micro things you could have done better, but you won the Elk sweepstakes. You know, I think Airha, take it or leave it. That's the one part that I'm a little bit on. But again, like, how many options were there in the support position? I like Jeja. I like Zika. I really like Elk. And I think Xiaohu's underrated. This is a team that I expect to genuinely compete, and I do like their offseason. But then moving on to our 7th team of the video, and it's a team that was kind of stuck around in Group Nirvana for most of last year, and they just kept fighting, they kept winning down in the lower groups, and eventually they got themselves into the top 8, and that was probably the best that they were going to do. It was Edward Gaming. This was a team that I had high expectations for, that I really liked in terms of an off-season report, because I love Xiaohao. He's kind of the channel darling for me from the LPL. He's the player that I will continue to go to bat for over and over again. I really like Angel as a player. I don't know if he has always gotten the credit he's deserved, and they got some really good performances out of players that I didn't expect, like ZDZ and Palkia, and so their future actually looks pretty good with a new AD carry coming in. We'll go ahead and talk about it here. Their lineup is looking like ZDZ in the top lane, Xiaohao in the jungle, Angel in the mid lane, Leave at AD carry, and Palkia at support. This is a weird roster because I think it's a bunch of role players, and typically that doesn't work. Like, you kind of need a carry. Luckily for this team, you've got 2 players that are definitely more carry-minded in Xiaohao and Leave that I think are going to be a bit more aggressive, and you've got some playmakers on this team that are going to be very willing to go out there and try and make flash plays, like Palkia, who I was really impressed with. But let's talk about, I guess we'll just go top to support here. I think that's probably the easiest way to discuss where EDG is at. What a year for ZDZ. Like, what a weird career he has had, man. I continue to say on this channel that I think ZDZ owes his entire career to Xiaohao. Like, I really just don't know how this guy would perform if Xiaohao was not in the league, how long ago he would have not been given a top lane job if Xiaohao was not constantly getting him jobs on even good teams. When he was on Weibo Gaming, he was getting him a job on the top side when the Shy was taking his break. It's just funny that ZDZ finally feels like he's starting to hit his stride again. This was easily his best year, probably after 2021. That's maybe the only other year that I can remember where he was like genuinely interesting as a player. 2022, he was okay, and he was fine, but 2023, 2024, like, they were bad years. I was calling ZDZ a non-worthwhile roster contributor in 2025. Like, I was going into the year with the expectation that this guy was like a C+ C graded player that really should not have an LPL job, that had low upside, that, you know, was not a weak side player, and he's not a carry player. So what exactly does he do at a high end level? And he comes out and he's really good in lane against bad competition on a regular basis. So that's your caveat, right? Is that EDG was in Group Nirvana and ZDZ didn't have to play any of the good top laners until the playoffs, where he actually got clobbered. So who knows what's going to happen to ZDZ moving forward. I still don't view him particularly highly. I'm generously giving him a B- because I think that he deserves it after the way he played last year. But if you want me to commit to feeling comfortable that ZDZ is going to be good enough to go up against like actually good top laners, I just don't feel that. Like, he doesn't really do anything at even like an above average level. He doesn't have a single skill that I think you would consider like a strength of his game. He's just kind of below average at everything. That does equalize out to a player that can survive at this level, but I really don't think he's ever going to be able to thrive. And once again, he gets another year on this roster. I think Xiaohao is definitely the appeal here. I continue to be the biggest Xiaohao fighter in the universe. I love this guy. Like, I really just don't get it. I don't get what top teams are not seeing. He got one absolutely tiny opportunity on Weibo, you know, a couple of years ago, and then when the team wasn't doing what they wanted it to, day number 1, he gets subbed out for Tarzan, one of the best junglers in the world, and of course the team looks better. Tarzan fixes every single team he goes to. I already talked about that in this video, but Xiaohao once again goes over to Rare Atom and ends up completely saving their season as well. So it's just, it's very weird to try and analyze Xiaohao because he is kind of a summer demon. I will give him that. Like, spring, winter, like, not always the best from Xiaohao. He's going to have some moments where he's a little bit less impactful. This guy is like the summer god. Like, every summer, this guy figures out how to play at a top tier level, and I continue to really value him. If he was slightly better, like, I mean, like half an inch better, right? Like, he would be a B+ player consistently on this channel. I would be considering him a top 5-ish jungler in the LPL. He's outside of that conversation for me, but is he on the same level as someone like Jeja that we just talked about? Yes, he's very much that kind of player. He is a good starter in this league and someone that you feel confident in if you were trying to play through. And now that you have another carry on this team alongside Xiaohao, I think things are getting even better for them. Angel is the final of the top side here to talk about. Angel has had kind of a career resurgence in the back half here, kind of a late career resurgence. Is that a fair way to describe what's happened to Angel? He looked like he was done, like on his way out done in 2023. It truly looked awful on RNG when he was brought in to compete with Tong Yuan. Like both of them did not look playable, and Angel was clearly not the guy for the job. Tong Yuan was even better than him in that stint, and you guys know my thoughts on him. We'll even talk about him a bit more later on in this video when we get to LGD, but Angel goes over to Ninjas in Pyjamas with Shadow and just completely reignites all positivity towards his career. He's amazing on that team, goes to OMG for a bit, plays fine, well enough, and goes over here to EDG, and once again is just a good mid laner at this level. With how up and down that position can be and how inconsistent so many players can be, for Angel to just be this like pinnacle of stability for these teams that really need it in the mid lane, like it's been a really awesome part of his career when it really felt like he was just on the downhill in 2022 and 2023 after making world finals in 2020. So happy to see that for Angel. He's just turned into a really good player. He's never going to be like a great player. I just don't think he has that mechanical upside. He's not good enough in lane to generate resources to ever compete like near the top, but against bad competition, he can look awesome. He can be, you know, the KDA monster that you're kind of looking for. And again, the stability in the mid lane that you kind of need to be offered. And then there's the bot lane. We'll talk about Palkia first because he is a retention here. He's going to get a B- grade for me. Man, I really wanted to give him a B, and I wanted to consider him in that tier with like Jway and Vampire, but it just did not feel correct to put him there just yet considering the level of competition he played against. But boy, from an upside perspective, I don't know, man. Am I taking Palkia over someone like Vampire? It's certainly not out of the realm of possibility. I think this guy showed everything that you could want to see out of a rookie last year from a playmaking perspective. He's got like hidden star written all over him. He was much better day number one than someone like Vampire was, or even someone like Jway. Like I think Jway was really good day number one and just didn't get the credit for it. I talked about that a lot on the channel in 2024, but Palkia was everything you could want to see in 2025, and if he can carry that over and even get better with a new AD carry going into this year, man, you're like genuinely looking at a player that could make a huge impact, that could be a top 3 or top 4 support by the end of the year. He's got that kind of upside. I'm really happy that this team was able to find him, because what a pull. Like there was no shot that they knew that they were getting this quality of player when Wink left to go to JD Gaming and he kind of came in as that replacement substitute. They got better in that role once Wink left, and I just don't think a lot of people expected that. So excited to see Palkia get the run back. And then Leave is kind of the reintroduction player here in the AD carry role. Of course, a longtime EDG youth player for many years, kind of came up and played really well as a rookie for Edward Gaming. He was kind of heralded as maybe the future of AD carries in the LPL. That tag gets thrown around to a ton of players. You've seen, you know, 1xN or Awesome, Assume, however you pronounce his name. I'm going to say Assume. Correct me in the comments. I always get it wrong, and somebody always tells me it's the other one, but like all those players have, you know, gotten the title of, oh, he's the next big breakout AD carry in the LPL. Leave actually was like the next big breakout AD carry, and then all the Jeje stuff happens, the drama surrounding him happens, and he ends up not being on the team anymore. He plays for Ninjas in Pyjamas last year and is exactly what he was before he left, which I think is the most disappointing part. Doesn't really feel like his game has evolved all that much. He continues to be a ridiculously highly skilled player. He has ridiculous mechanics, very aggressive, knows how to hyper carry, and just has no brain. Like he is a glass cannon that a good team can point towards an objective and get him to dominate team fights, but he is going to make mental and positioning errors regularly for your team, and they're almost always going to come in the most important moments of the game. I had a meme about this in LPL casts and even on this channel where it's like, Leave plays a perfect game if you just skip 20 to 25 minutes. At some point in the early late game, this guy will make a catastrophic error that will lose his team the game, and it's just so frustrating. But if he can clean up on that, and I will continue to say this, if he can clean up on that, he's a ridiculously good AD carry at the baseline ADC things. He just needs to stop making these critical errors that lose his team games. This is an upgrade over On, who was a huge disappointment for this team last year. I was really high on during his time in 2024 and 2023, and it just has not carried through at all. He was terrible last year. Leave at a base level is definitely better than what they got out of On, so this team is getting better going into next year, but Leave has the potential to be a star on this team because you have really good supportive pieces. If you can just get Palkia to be a big playmaker, and Angel is really stable in the mid lane, and ZDZ and Xiao Hao are good on the top side, Leave, if he can be an all-pro caliber ADC, which he has the talent to do, like this team all of a sudden kind of leapfrogs their way into borderline top 5 conversations. That's how good they can be in a weakened LPL. I'm not saying they're definitely going to be able to do that. I would definitely bet against that, but this is a team that I think has real upside. They also have a floor because it's totally possible for Leave to just not be consistent in any way and for this team to rely on him to win games, and he just isn't always going to be able to do that. This could be the definition of a 500 or slightly below 500 team. That's kind of what I'm betting on. I'm just hoping for some development from players like Palkia to really show that the future of this organization is in a good spot. But then moving on to our 8th and final playoff team, technically, final team to get through playoffs, or get into playoffs last year. It's Ninjas in Pyjamas, and we're going from a team that basically made no changes to a team that made all the changes. I mean, this entire org is upended, every single player is new, and I'm gonna say it, I don't think there's any sort of argument for this. The losers of the offseason are Ninjas in Pyjamas. They went from a team that was good enough to, at the very least, go to an international tournament in the Asia Invitational at the end of last year, be a top 8 team, and, you know, perform in the playoffs, to a team that is going to be one of the worst in the entire league, and I would be shocked if it goes in any other direction. So we can talk about it, but I just don't think there's going to be all that much positivity in this section of the video. Their lineup in 2026 is looking like Hoya in the top lane, Guan in the jungle, Care in the mid lane, Assume at AD carry, and Zhuo at support. This team sucks, man. Like, I don't know. I don't want to beat around the bush. This is a bad offseason. Like, this is the first offseason that we've gotten here where I genuinely am just not happy with the way that this has turned out. I don't think there's any upside to this team. I think there's potentially a floor because at the very least, these players have consistently played in the LPL. Players like Care and Hoya and Zhuo have had so much time here despite the fact that they've never really gotten better at any point throughout their career. And I think, again, there is some upside with some specific players that I will talk about. But man, like, I just don't really get it. Like, is this just the cheapest roster you could feasibly construct? Is that the direction we're going in? You're like, Doingby doesn't want to play anymore because this entire team tilted him last year, so now we're just going to switch it up and go entirely to budget. Is that genuinely what this is? Because I can't think of a single other reason for their roster to look like this. You know, we can go from top to support here, kind of talking about things. There's a lot of red on this screen, a lot of downgrades. Only one position is not getting downgraded, and even then, I think you're getting worse as a player. I think Niket is better than Zhuo. I just don't think it's by enough for me to consider it a massive downgrade. I think you can expect a reasonably similar output from a player like Zhuo, who I think maybe gets a bad rap at times, which is weird to say, but, you know, we'll get to that. Let's just go top to support. Let's start with Hoya. Hoya getting jobs in the big 2-6 is very shocking to me. I'm going to be entirely frank with you. I'm not a Hoya guy, not really a Hoya defender. I don't know how you can watch his tape on Thunder Talk this year, last year, you know, whenever, like 2025, 2024, like even at the time, the LCK days, I think are fine. They're better than people give him credit for. The only time he's ever played like a passable player was at the end of 2023, and he's never done it again. Like, he's never, ever done it again. I just don't get it. He's getting a C+ because at the bare minimum, this guy can play weak side. He is okay at being able to lose by 20 CS and go down a little bit in terms of laning phase while not bleeding out the entire game, but like, I'm sorry, he is a weak starter. He's the definition of a weak starter. You are never getting a player in the top lane here that is going to be better than, you know, a bottom 5 top laner in the league. That's just not going to happen with a player like Hoya, and it's definitely a downgrade to Solo Kill, who not only was significantly better last year in terms of the gameplay that we saw, but I think Solo Kill has a lot of upside to tap into. I'm stunned that he is not back here as a starting top laner and that they brought in Hoya, because I think you're just going in the wrong direction. You are going from a relatively young, relatively inexperienced top laner that has shown really good flashes to a very experienced, very washed, not good top laner that has had chance after chance after chance. This is just the worst possible move you could make. This is a huge downgrade on the top side. Let's talk about Guan for a second. He is, of course, coming over from the LCP. Most recently, he played for DFM in the LCP, but the reason you might not have seen a lot of games from him recently is because he got benched on DFM. This team was not doing well. Detonation Focus Me is obviously the most historic organization in Japanese League of Legends history. He gets brought over as an import from the Challengers League. He, of course, was a part of T1 Challengers, you know, and that whole group. He was playing with Smash and Reckless in T1 Challengers and Poby, you know, all these players that everybody knows on that team in T1 Challengers. He goes over to play for DFM, and he's so bad that they have to bench him midway through the year, and that team instantly gets better the moment he is not playing. I went back and even watched some of the Challengers League tape. I do not get it, man. I'm out. Like you can count me officially out on Guan. This is maybe the worst import of the entire offseason, in my opinion, from an LPL perspective. I don't see what they see. I don't even really see. I know there might be some analysts out there that might see it a little bit more. If you do, let me know in the comments, because trust me, I've watched tape of this guy. I watched his DFM tape. I went and watched the T1 Challengers tape. There is no, like, actually good tier 1 qualities in this guy right now. Like, he just does not play the game at a professional level. Like, I don't really know what to tell you. He is not a terrible player, but I want to try to describe this in a way that doesn't only make sense to me. He is clearly really good at League of Legends from a solo queue perspective. And I think you immediately have an idea in your mind on what I mean when I say that. Like, he is good at League. The things that you need to do to be a jungler, he can do at an okay level. This guy has no idea how to play competitive League of Legends. Like, he just does not get it. Like, I don't really understand what his decision-making looks like. I don't really understand what the thought process behind a lot of his moves end up looking like. I think this is a bad import. You know, if you were always going to lose Nio because he was going to go back to top esports, that's fine, but there were so many other options. You know, there are potentially players like Sorrow that don't have a job, that don't have a team going into 2026, and I just don't understand why you're not promoting internally within the region, and rather you're going to players that were getting benched in the LCP, that were getting benched on teams that weren't even close to Worlds, like DFM in the LCP, and saying that's the guy we want to commit to. I think Guan is one of, if not the worst signing of the offseason. He's getting a C grade for me. I think he's as close as I came to a C-, but he's never played in tier 1 outside of the LCP. He's never played in the LPL, is I guess the point I was trying to make there. So I don't want to like really criticize him too heavily. It's just, I don't get it. I need someone to explain to me why they would make this decision. Whatever they saw in scrims must have been transcendent. And then we can talk about Care in the mid lane. Care is your definition of a C+ player. This guy has been a weak mid lane starter for years. I'm not going to say the Hoya of mid lane, because I think he's better than Hoya, but like realistically speaking, when has Care ever been anything other than like slightly below average? Like, that is what, when I think of Care, I think of slightly below the median line. No matter who the median line is, no matter where that is, he is always slightly below it. Whatever your middle ground is, if 7 is your middle ground, he's going to be somewhere from 8 to 10 in terms of mid laners going into this split. It's just crazy to me. Like, he's never broken out. He's never been particularly consistent. He was the franchise player of FPX in the final couple of years, and he never developed. Like, I just don't really get why you're planting your flag here. Going from Doingby to Care, yeah, that's a downgrade. Again, another player who doesn't really do anything at an exceptional level. He's kind of a jack of all trades, master of none, but like worse than that archetype would typically be. I use that phrase to describe players like Doctum and FBI and their respective regions. Care is not on that level in terms of how he performs domestically. He's one of the weaker mid laners in the region. He just doesn't really have a high quality trade, and once again, it's another year of him getting a job on a team that probably should be looking to at least go with some sort of youth, and I think that's the frustrating part, and I'll get to that a bit more at the end. But then you have the one piece on this team that I actually like, and that's Assume in the AD carry role, but it's still a downgrade. Leave is a better player than Assume is right now. I don't think it's by a lot. I think they're in the same like stratosphere. You know, it's B to B minus. I think this is the closest you're going to get in terms of like a neutral movement, maybe outside of the support position, and Assume is almost certainly going to be the best player on this team, but like, he's not a star. People have been, you know, pointing out that he has potential to be a really good AD carry, but every single ADC who shows any kind of small trait in the LPL is immediately deemed the next big superstar. He got that tag on LGD, and he's never lived up to it. It's never been there. He's a good player. He's a B-, definition of a B-. He is fine enough as a starter. He's totally fine starting in the LPL, but he's not really going to make or break your team. Again, another player who I think is fine at everything. He doesn't really have a strong trait. He's not like someone like Leave, who's a really aggressive player who can generate a lot of resources and take over team fights if he's put into a good spot, but he has weaknesses in other areas. It's another player that I think is just kind of balanced out in a way that makes his impact on the game overall just less than maybe these players that are a bit more specialized. It's another downgrade in the AD carry role. The only one I'm not considering a downgrade is the support position, even if I do think you are getting a worse player in terms of what we've seen recently going from Niket to Jouot, but Joao, I think, sometimes gets a bad rap. I think he came into JDG, and that team got better when he came in to replace Wink. I think he was the most productive support that team had over the course of last year, which is a crazy thing to say. That being said, like, the bar was in hell for JDG supports. I just don't really know how to analyze Joao, because he's a player that I think has generally looked fine, like a B-ish caliber player, so long as he's not playing with Fodic. But he's been paired up with the worst AD carry in the league for his entire career, and so he's naturally just kind of been dragged down in terms of his production. I think there's a world where this bot lane's actually fine, where they're the strength of this team and they're what they play through, and they're, you know, around league average and can compete with, at the very least, like the weaker, like, playoff caliber bot lanes. But do I think that this bot lane can be the best part of a team that actually seriously wants to win games? Absolutely not. If you're relying on Assume and Joao as a duo to carry you through games, you're cooked, man. Like, it's not gonna work. Hoya and Care aren't gonna win you games. The tape I saw on Guan is just not good. Like, I don't really know what else to to say this team looks bad. Like they're in serious contention for being bottom 1 going into next year, which I just think is absurd for a team coming off of a playoff run. I really hate this offseason. Easily the losers of the offseason here in the LPL, and the worst one we're going to talk about in today's video. But then moving on to our 9th team in the video, but the team that technically finished in 10th place by the end of the previous year because FPX is now gone. It's Team WE that we get to talk about next. And WE had a very interesting offseason. I honestly thought they were going to make more changes than what they actually did. Some of these were, again, out of their control, but they kept the one player that kept their season afloat all year long in Monkey in the jungle and did build around him. They brought in a really interesting young AD carry from the Challengers League that I'm really excited to talk about. And the rest of this roster, while it's not good, I don't think is, unplayable. I think that there might be some sort of upside to be a similar team to what they were last year, but I think realistically, what you're looking at for WE is a team that just continues to fail to take that next jump and really are going to be relying on Monkey being an MVP caliber superstar in order to make that happen. We can go ahead and talk about the team now. Their lineup in 2026 is looking like Cube in the top lane, Monkey in the jungle, Karis in the mid lane, about at AD carry, and Yao Yao at support. I think it's Yao Yao, Yao. I've covered this guy on the channel before, but that was before I was really committing to making sure that I was pronouncing every single player correctly. I'm gonna say Yao Yao for now because again, that's what I was used to when I was talking about him many years ago, but let me know if I'm correct or incorrect down in the comment section below. The top side is remaining the same for WE, and I think that for the most part is both good and bad. The good is jungle, the bad is the solo lane, so I guess we can talk about it here. We can start with the good, and that of course is Monkey, the potential superstar that they have here on the roster. I've always really liked this guy and his gameplay. I was really hyping him up when he was playing for LGD Gaming. I was pretty vocal in 2024 about how I thought EDG got better once Jeje, Jeje had a lot of off the riff stuff. I think he was hospitalized for a bit of time, was very sick, and so Monkey had to come in and replace him, but he ended up just playing the rest of the year anyways for a team that was an absolute disaster for EDG in 2024, and I thought the team looked better with him than they did with Jeje. That's not to say that I think he's infinitely better than Jeje or anything like that. I think they have the same grade for me, but Monkey is the kind of player that I think can really take bad game states and turn them into good ones, which I don't think is very common in the LPL. He is a carry. He is somebody who wants to step up and be the main character for his individual team, and I think he does that really well on WE. There were times last year where he was the only player that was pushing this team forward, and when you think about WE's success over the course of 2025, or at least their overperformance in 2025, almost all of it comes down to how well he was able to control the game. Of course, there were moments where I think the bot lane was effective. I think Vampire had a pretty good year. I think Taeyun even had moments where he looked like an average player, most of that being when he could get early leads. You could see what people were seeing in scrims, as I talked about in the LCK recap video. But for the most part, Monkey was the only consistently capable player for WE, and building around him makes the most sense. I'm honestly mostly surprised that he's back on this team, not because I think WE wanted to move on, but I'm honestly surprised that a bigger team didn't come calling and say hey, we can build around Monkey. I love Nio, and I really don't think that it's wrong to pick Nio over Monkey. I think they're similar players. They have similar kinds of upside if you're top esports, but if Monkey was on top esports, I wouldn't have been surprised. That's the kind of caliber of team that I kind of expected Monkey to be on going into 2026, but he stays here on WE. He's pseudo franchise player now. He's definitely the player they are building around him. I think they have interesting pieces. It might not just be him throughout the rest of this year, which is a good thing. As for the rest of the top side, this is where I get less optimistic. Cube and Karis are just nothing. There's not really a lot to talk about here. Cube is the definition of the most passable starter that you can possibly get on the top side. I was lower on him going into 2025 than I am right now. I think he's better right now than I thought he was going to be. He looked incredibly washed in 2024, did not look like a competent player. I compared him to Hoya, but I think I even ranked him lower than a player like Hoya going into 2025. And so to see him come out last year and not be the worst top laner in the league, to be stable enough on weak side, on the top side, and just be able to survive and allow the rest of the team to do things, I think that was enough for me to say, well, that's probably the best you're going to get out of Cube, and that's kind of best case scenario for this player. I felt comfortable bumping him up to a B-. In his prime, he was probably the best weak side top laner in the LPL in terms of how he was playing on Rare Atom back in the day in 2020 and 2021. That player's been gone for a very long time. I think people are still kind of hoping and praying that version of Cube can still exist, when I think he was valuable as a player, and again, I just don't think it's there anymore. I think this, what you got last year in 2025 is probably the best possible outcome for what Cube can be. I think there's a reality where he is much worse this year in the same way that he was in 2024 and really at the end of 2023 as well. But I also think if he is just weak side and you allow Monkey to kind of be more aggressive from a jungle perspective and you don't have to pay attention to top lane all that much, that's fine for this team. You can get away with that in a top lane pool here in the LPL that I've talked about many times in this video is particularly weak, right? Like, you're not going to get punished by most teams for having someone like Cube on the top side. He's just not particularly exciting. He really has no upside. Best case scenario for him is that he's irrelevant. So it's just not, it's not exactly a ringing endorsement. And then there's Karis in the mid lane, who I am just not a fan of. There is nothing on tape that makes me feel good about Karis. I think it's realistic to say that he played the best he ever did in Tier 1 last year for WE, certainly better than he did in the LCK during any of his years as a starter there, but very similar to other players that we are going to talk about, even someone like Care that we just talked about in this video. Karis has gotten so many chances on so many different teams with so many different players, and he's never really looked like a competent, even average player at any level. Even during his best year, what I would consider him being the most comfortable and certainly the most protected like he was in 2025, he still was a below average mid laner. He just wasn't the worst in the entire league. Like, he's a C+, and that's like on his best day. I still think that there is a universe in a world where he becomes the worst mid laner in the entire league, where he just can't keep up from a laning perspective and doesn't really have the macro to be able to, turn things around once he's down in gold. I think a lot of the reason WE suffered down the stretch of last split was because they didn't have any pressure from the middle of the map. They just couldn't win in the mid lane. Mid laners got better, I think, as the year went along in the LPL, and Karis was starting to get rolled over. That's why this team inevitably didn't make the playoffs despite overperforming and getting top 4 in the spring split. So bringing Karis back, I think, is a questionable decision. I certainly would have moved on and went in a different direction, but I also wouldn't have signed him in the first place in the same way that I criticized this team's offseason last year. So, it just kind of is what it is. I think the solo laners are not exciting at all, but I think the bot lane does have some potential to, at the very least, be interesting or fun to talk about throughout the year, and that mostly comes from About, who's coming over from Gen G's Challengers team, Gen G Academy, whatever you want to call them, the Challengers League team of Gen G. About is coming over from there. I talked about Namgung, his bot lane partner, when we talked about Bro in the LCK, and in that section, I kind of noted how it's really difficult to evaluate almost anybody else on that Gen G Academy team, maybe with the exception of someone like Winner, because About was like the main character of that team. They played so much for bot lane that it's really tough to actually get an idea of how versatile any of those players are and how well their skill sets are going to translate. But at the very least, About was the main character on a Challengers League team that was mediocre, like at the very least middle of the road, and his mechanics, it makes it clear why they felt so comfortable investing into him. I think there is a non-zero chance that he is a fantastic import from the Challengers League, that he's somebody that can come in and be a really interesting prospect. I was actually kind of expecting an LCK team to pick him up and kind of give him a look, like a bottom tier LCK team, but him coming over here to the LPL might be even better for him, because I think there is a lot more opportunity for growth and a lot more opportunity to play against players that maybe aren't quite as dominant as you're going to get regularly in the LCK. I think About has all the potential in the world to genuinely turn into one of the better ADCs in the LPL. I just don't think he'll be there year one. I don't think the surrounding cast here is perfect for it, but if you want to have excitement about this team, it's the fact that Monkey is on a great growth trajectory right now. He is in a great spot to continue to get better basically every single split, and if he does make that leap, if he can become like a B+, hell, even an A-, like consistently over the course of an entire split, and you get, a player in About that has like genuine upside, that's where a lot of the excitement around WE I think could come in 2026. But part of that kind of gets moved around for Yao Yao in the support position. It's just so difficult to grade him out because we haven't talked about him as a pro league player in quite a while. He's been coaching for a little bit of time, and obviously this was a guy who was a bit of a channel darling when he was playing for Thunder Talk back in the day, but it's just been so long since we've seen him play, and it's really tough for me to imagine that he's going to be like a star coming back and really kind of continuing to grow on that trajectory that I think he was on in like 2022, when I do think he was relatively underrated, all things considered, as a player. I'm giving him a C+ grade for now, because I do think that it's very likely that his floor is just astronomically low, but he's a very smart player, and he was always in the right place at the right time. I think that's what I really valued from him. Again, in the LPL, you just don't really get a lot of supports that are, making the correct macro play most of the time. Most of the best supports in the region are just mechanically better than everybody else, and so they can just kind of get away with a lot. I'm looking at On and, players of that nature. Then you have someone like Yao Yao that I think is genuinely very stable, very smart, but he just doesn't really have the mechanical upside to ever be like a superstar. He's not a playmaker in that kind of way. I think that could work for this team. Again, you've got players that have the mechanical talent to be able to take over in Monkey and About. If Yao Yao is smart enough to be able to set them up and be stable, like if he's just a B- or a B caliber player, if he's, anywhere close to what they got out of Vampire last year in that support position, this is going to be basically the same team they were in 2025. And that's a good thing for WE, because I think that there was a world where they kind of came crashing back down to earth. I think they drastically overperformed their talent level in 2025. Mostly due to Monkey being really good, but losing Vampire is a problem. I still have this listed as a downgrade. Yao Yao is not Vampire. He certainly doesn't have the floor of Vampire. I think that there's a world where as a player, he can actually be a bit more consistent than what Vampire was for this team, but he'll never have the highs. He's just not that kind of player. And also, I'm only listing About coming in as a change. I'm not even listing that as a straight up upgrade, because at the very least, Taeyun was productive at times last year. I think I'm kind of in the middle. I've kind of gotten caught in the middle on Taeyun's like overall arc, where I was so anti him coming out of the LCK, and a lot of people last year are kind of talking about how Vampire was the only player to kind of elevate him, like he basically got carried by his support. I think that's partially true. I think Taeyun was not nearly as good as Vampire was, and I think that there were a lot of times at the end of the year he got exposed for that, but I'm not going to expect About to come in and just be better than him. I expect him to come in and be what Taeyun was day number one. I think he should be better than him by the end of the year, but I can't rank him that in terms of his floor. Both of them are coming in as B minuses. So overall, where does this team land? They're still going to be competing for top 8. Like, they're going to be in that conversation. I don't think they're going to be favorites to be anywhere in the top 8, at least from my perspective. Like I've said a couple of times in this video, I do think the LPL has gotten weaker, but it's all going to be on the development of Monkey and really on the development of About, who I think could be a really good player, whether or not this team actually lives up to their own ambitions. But then moving on to our 10th team of the video, and a team that is one of the few at the end of this video that I'm not entirely sure we have the right roster for. They could have a couple of configurations. There's been rumors about a couple of players, but I'm playing it safe with the one that you see on your screen now. It's Ultra Prime. That is the 10th team we will be talking about. An org that has very, very rarely found any success in the LPL, and it looks like they are going to continue that trend. Another org who's off-season I'm not really a fan of. I honestly was kind of gearing up to be like, they're building something interesting here on Ultra Prime, and then a lot of the rumors seem to have fallen through. They go for different players than maybe were advertised, and I certainly think that they're in a worse spot now because of it. I'll kind of talk about maybe what some of those rumors were and why I was excited for those in case they do actually end up happening, but for now, it is looking like their 2026 lineup is Liang Chen in the top lane, Luo Yeye in the jungle. I believe that's how you say that. I'm going to struggle with that all year long if that is going to be the starting player here, which we will talk about. Saber in the mid lane, Baiye at AD carry, and Xiaoxia at support. This is obviously a team full of pretty unproven players. Somehow, someway, Saber has become the veteran on this team, which is never really a great sign to be able to talk about. He's definitely the player that has come through and kind of become the main guy for Ultra Prime. Xiaoxia, I guess, in the same vein, is in that conversation, but, we'll get to them now. I guess since they're the returning members, we don't need to wait for them. The positions that we can talk about being kind of up in the air are jungle and AD carry. I have heard rumors of multiple players in the jungle, whether that be Sorrow, who would make a lot more sense than Luo Yeye, at least in my opinion, and then also you've heard rumors of Grizzly, the Hanwha Life Esports Challengers jungler, who was excellent across the Challengers League. I think he would be the best option of those three. Maybe Sorrow would be a bit better. I really like Sorrow as a player. And then you've also heard some rumors that it won't be Baiye, that it will actually be Henna. I don't really know if any of those are true. I don't know if they're just rumors. This is their Demacia Cup roster, at least as far as we know. As I'm recording this, I'm pre-recording this a couple of days before it comes out, so it's like the 9th now. So if it ends up being a little bit different, I do apologize, but for now, I at the very least have these guys listed, and if this is going to be the roster, at the very least, you've got young players, like you've got unproven players on this team that could have some potential upside. Saber, again, like I said, has kind of become the face of the team here. He's fine. Like, he's not an excellent player. He's like the definition of a C+. I think you could argue maybe he's a B-, but mid is one of the few positions in the league that I think actually has some level of depth near the top of the league, and so I don't feel the need to artificially inflate some of these grades nearly as much. Saber is a weak starter. He's somebody who is really good at the things he's good at. He's built in the Zeka and Cream mold where he wants to play those melee assassins. He's very good on things like Sylas and Akali, and, does want to be more of an aggressive player. When he has to play control mages, he's not nearly as consistent, but even on the assassins, he's not particularly consistent. He can have really big breakout games, and he can also be, kind of underperforming at the time. Like, there's not really a lot you can judge him off of. I think that the best thing I can say about Saber is that his good games genuinely do look very good at the LPL level. Now, you can say that about a lot of mid laners. I'm not necessarily super sold that Saber's just going to be a good player in the long term. Like, he reminds me quite a bit of Care, if I'm being entirely honest. I don't really see a lot of differences in their game, and that's not exactly a ringing endorsement if you heard me talk about ninjas in pajamas earlier in this video, but I will say for Saber, he at least has some mechanical upside. He's certainly not a bad 1v1 player, and he can generate his own leads, which means that there are going to be times where, at the very least, he's not going to be a detriment to the team. For the most part, he's going to be fine. He's exactly what Ultra Prime usually has as a mid laner, which is a player that is below average, but not one that's going to be, you know, completely consequential towards destroying your entire season. And then you've got the bot lane here of Baya and Xiaoxia. Again, we'll talk about Xiaoxia first because I'm pretty confirmed that he's locked in here as the starting support. Was not impressed with him. I was very vocal about this as we watched the LPL last year. I don't think this guy's very good. I don't think he does a lot of things that are particularly consistent. I think basically every single positive play he makes is kind of like he shoots for the stars, and sometimes it lands, and most of the time it doesn't, right? And that's why you get these weird stats. I pulled this up when I was casting. I actually did a pre-show segment on him where his stats in wins are incredible, and his stats in losses are the worst in the entire league. Like, there's not a single player in any major region who had worse stats in losses than Xiaoxia here for Ultra Prime, and you could extrapolate that to mean, oh, he's so important towards the success of this team, and I agree with you on that, but I think more importantly, when you look at why he ended up landing on those statistics and why that gigantic gap ended up being there between the wins and the losses, it's because he takes such risky plays that they either work and you get major tempo advantages because he's taking gigantic risks, or most of the time they don't, and he's like the worst and least valuable player in the entire league. So it's just a really tough middle ground to hit. I don't think he's overall a positive player for this team. He ranks as a C, not even a C+. I don't think he's a good starter. I certainly would have went in a different direction from a support perspective. I simply think there are too many good options in the Challengers League and in the LDL right now to have given, you know, a punt on to run back Xiaoxia. But, you know, this team, again, Saber and Xiaoxia both came up through the Ultra Prime system. They came up through the Ultra Prime LDL team, and they're clearly players that the organization wants to continue to invest in. Baya is in a similar spot if he is actually starting here. Baya is so nothing. Like, I wish I could have a nice thing to say about him. He's not bad. He, again, is kind of that jack of all trades, master of none, but very similar to what we talked about before, that, like, he doesn't excel at anything. Like, he's not even above average at anything. It's not like someone like Doc Dummer FBI, who I give that label to, where they're at the very least good at everything. They're just not masters at anything. He's not really good at anything. He's just kind of average at everything, which turns into a below average player. Like, he's not terrible. He doesn't make massive mental errors. His positioning is fine. His ability to play lane is fine. He's generally losing in the 2v2, but, you know, that's not always his fault. Xiaoxia is a really bad 2v2 player, so, you know, how much do I want to attribute that to him? He's not taking over team fights, but his team's not really setting him up. Like, there haven't been a lot of opportunities to play hyper carry ADCs on this team, but he's also not really shown any ability or any desire to step up and be able to 1v9 on bad teams like other, you know, interesting young players have. He's just fine. Like, he's, again, a definition of a C+ player. Him and Saber are in pretty similar boats, except I think Baya is more stable with less upside in terms of the mechanics. But that's where we transition to the two new players on this team from last year, and they're on the top side of the map. It's Liang Chen and it's Luo Yeye, which this is such an interesting conversation because technically you have 4 members of BLG Juniors on this team from last year, with Baya and Xiaoxia at least having some time on that team, I believe, in split number 1 back in the winter. Liang Chen and Luo Yeye were on that team as well, but notably, none of them were on that team when BLG Juniors was winning towards the end of the year. None of them were actually playing. They all either were, you know, in the LPL, in the bot lane's case, or just not in the LDL as far as I'm aware. For Liang Chen and Luo Yeye's case, like, it's just a really weird pickup for me that this is the version of the roster that you want to build. You're basically building split 1 BLG Juniors, and I think that's just a strange choice considering how good BLG Juniors was. We're going to talk about more of their players a little bit later. Their solo laners are both in the league now. I already mentioned someone like Chester as a potential option for teams that I really wanted to see be considered, but I especially am confused here, and we'll start with the jungle position because I do think there's some variance with who could be selected here. Sorrow was considered and was rumored for this team. Likely that is just out of the rumor mill at this point, because I imagine that what ended up happening is that a lot of people heard, oh, the BLGJ jungler is going to Ultra Prime, and they were like, oh, that must be Sorrow, the finals MVP of split number 3, and somebody who performed incredibly well, one of the best performing players in the LDL for multiple years in a row now as a jungler, and they were like, no, it's the other BLGJ jungler, Luo Yeye. which I just find to be a really interesting decision. Again, there's also been some rumors of Grizzly coming over. I think Grizzly is incredible. Both Grizzly and Sorrow, I think, would be really good additions to this team. If it is going to be Lua Yeye, that's confusing to me. This is a downgrade, and I have to list it as such. They actually found something in Junhao last year. There was no consistency, and there was no real pattern to when he would play good or bad. He really struggled against talent that was better than him. There was a clear ceiling on what he could look like, but at the very least, he could dominate if he was given resources. I don't really feel that good about Lua Yeye. First off, his tape is almost impossible to find. It is really tough to find games of these two players, and I tried to find games where all four of these players were playing on the same team, and that was even tougher. So, pardon if I don't have quite as much to say about these guys as I do some of the other LDL promotions, because it's just so tough to watch early season LDL action so late in the year. You really have to go digging in a lot of places, and it can be tough when you have to Google Translate every single page. But I can say for Lua Yeye, he's fine. Like, everything I've seen of him, he's good enough as a player to maybe be given a look. Do I feel great about it? No. Like, I have the same grade on him that I do on Guwon in terms of, what I can expect day number one. Now, Guwon has had more experience, and that I think bumps him up a little bit. Lua Yeye, I think, has more upside because at the very least, I think he hasn't shown to be bad at certain things in the same way that someone like Guwon has for Ninjas in Pyjamas. But I just don't understand this. Why is this not Sorrow? Why are you not going out and getting him? If Sorrow was teamless, like going into the beginning of this year, at least from a tier 1 perspective, I just don't really understand what's going on. I feel like we must have watched different finals if that is the case. So whatever it is, like, this to me is a downgrade in terms of process. I would have rather just kept Junhao. I certainly would have rather had Sorrow, and if this is going to be Grizzly, throw everything out. Grizzly is an upgrade to this team. He's probably a B-ish kind of player day number one with the potential to get, more. I got a lot of criticism, or at least some criticism, in my LCK video for saying that Vincenzo wasn't, like, blowing me away in terms of the tape that I saw in Tier 2. That's because I think players like Grizzly were better in the Challengers League, and so, if that does end up being possible for this team, I would be more excited. But if it is going to be Lua Yeye, which it looks like it is, they signed him, at the very least he's in this organization, then, I'm just not quite as excited. I certainly think the floor is a lot lower, and the same thing for Liang Chen on the top side. He's basically the same exact argument that I just made for Lua Yeye. It's just, a player that is maybe not being asked to do as much. This is, again, another downgrade because you basically took the two best players on this team last year, in Zhang and Junhao, and turned them into two players that got benched on a championship-winning LDL team. I just don't really understand. Now, Liang Chen, I think, has shown a little bit more in terms of what we can expect. Split 2, I think, was at the very least, viewable for both of these two, and Liang Chen, I think, had some really interesting, moments in there. Not quite as much as Keshi, who we will talk about a little bit later, who I think is an interesting player, but again, I just don't really love the process, and it's not necessarily the players. Maybe the players turn out okay, but it's just really hard for me to believe that what they are doing is correct when there are so many players that have performed so well in Tier 2, and they're just, like, skipping over them to go for players that got replaced by the players that did well in Tier 2. Like, Liang Chen, again, I think there's more of an understandable argument. At the very least, the player that came in and replaced Liang Chen is playing in the LPL this year. If Sorrow is not playing and Luo Yeye is, like, not playing well, I'm just going to be so confused as to why we ended up going down this road. I also don't really agree with just keeping the bot lane the same. I think that they were one of the worst performing bot lanes in the entire league last year, and I think you needed to make a change in some way, but maybe you have some of that magic from the Split 1 BLG Juniors team that had 4 of these members on it, and maybe Saber can figure things out in the mid lane as well. Like, they're clearly going for something here. I just think this is yet another budget roster for Ultra Prime that isn't even budgeting correctly, because I think that there were young players that you could get with more upside. I really just don't understand the direction this org is heading, and I don't really like this offseason. Then moving on to our 11th team of the video. Remember, 14 teams to cover, so we're getting near the end. And our second team, where I at the very least have a caveat in terms of what this roster could actually look like at the start of winter. It's LGD Gaming, who took the core that they had last year that they kind of built through, and they're committing to this core. It looks like only one player is getting changed out. I don't even think that change is all that consequential. I'll talk about why I think these two players are actually very similar in terms of the way they play. You're just hoping that you can get a player with a little bit more upside coming in than, potentially what Xiao Chenghua was giving you throughout a lot of last year and, throughout times in the LGD system. You're hoping you can get a bit upgraded there in the mid lane, but everything else right now, as of now at the very least, is unchanged. Top lane, there's been some tryouts, there's been some conversations with Zhang from Ultra Prime, and I think that that would be an interesting decision, but we can talk about that when we get there. For now, it looks like their lineup is going to be Sasa in the top lane, Climber in the jungle, Tong Yuan in the mid lane, Savior at AD carry, and YCX at support. Obviously, this is the core that they wanted to build around, and I don't blame them for running back what was another year of overachieving for this LGD team. Every year, every single year, you get the same result from this organization where they bring up a bunch of players from the LDL, either from their own system or from other systems. They look like a team that, has some sort of ceiling, but their floor is particularly low. They don't look good at the beginning of the year, and then somehow, some way, they're like the 11th best team in the LPL. They're never actually competitive, but they're always better than like the worst teams in the entire league, and once again, they kind of accomplished that goal. In 2025, do I think they have the upside to get better than that? I think it's possible. I certainly think there are some interesting things to talk about with some of these players, but I'm not exactly sold that anybody here is a superstar or that anybody here is going to become a superstar. I think there's players I feel better about than others, but nobody that I feel phenomenal about. It's not like for WE when we talked about somebody like Monkey. I don't think you really had that kind of performance last year. To me, the closest you got to that was probably Sasa in the top lane, but we don't even really know if he's going to be starting for this team. Like I said, Jong has been reported to be trying out for this team. If he ends up being the starter, I think they're both very similar, again, in terms of maybe what you can expect. This would definitely be listed as a change and not as like an upgrade or a downgrade. Both of them would come in with B- grades, but that's because both of them are carry-oriented players that I think have shown good things at being able to win and generate resources at the tier 1 level. I really like Sasa's tape. It's super inconsistent. He doesn't really have a good game plan when he has a losing matchup. He doesn't really know what he's supposed to be doing in the later part of the game, but he's mechanically talented. Like, he reminds me a lot of a young Xiaoshu, who obviously has started to develop now on JD Gaming. I think Sasa's in a relatively similar spot as a top laner in terms of what he is good at and what he is bad at. I think that there are a lot of hype moments that you can kind of get behind. Very funny to talk about him, with the LGD system, who, kind of gave up on Xiaoshu once they found something in him, or at least traded him away to Rare Atom, I believe, at the time. But Sasa, I think, is a player that you should continue to run with. I wouldn't be mad if they brought on Zhang, another player that I think showed a lot of good traits and was, for the most part, the second most valuable player on that Ultra Prime team last year behind Jun Hao. Again, I think both of them give you, free upside, but you already have Sasa in the system. You might as well continue to run with him if he is here. We have to talk about some of the other players. We'll go a bit out of order here and talk about the bot lane first, because I have a full discussion with Climber that I really want to get into, but Savior and YCX are fine. Like, I honestly think they have the upside to be the middle of the road bot lane in the LPL if they do end up landing. I think YCX definitely showed more in 2025 than Savior did. I'm really not a big fan of Savior. Wasn't really a big fan of Xiaoya before he changed his name. I think Savior is just kind of your, again, below average ADC. Reminds me a lot of Baya. I think Baya has significantly more upside than someone like Savior does. I think that there have been moments, especially at lower levels of competition, where he has shown the ability to win lane, but I think that that is not something you can consistently project to him from a tier 1 perspective. I think his biggest advantage is going to be he's really good at going neutral, especially in matchups where he has to be isolated on weak side, and he's a decent mid-game skirmisher. He's really not all that bad in that phase of the game. If you can get him there a little bit more consistently, then yeah, he might be a valuable player. He might be somebody that you could actually, feel good about starting. But YCX actually does have some potential to be a good playmaker for this team if they want to unlock him more. I think he is definitely a bit of a, one-trick playstyle kind of player. He wants to play Nautilus or Leona or a lot of these more tanky engaged threats. He's not nearly as consistent on other champions, but when he does get, the champions that have been the most meta across professional League of Legends for basically its entire existence, he looks really good, and that's a good thing. If there's going to be an archetype that you are specializing in, it might as well be the one that's basically never going to go out of meta. Engaging is really important. So I like YCX. I think it's good to be able to keep him here, and him and Savior have decent chemistry together. I think Savior is better off for playing with YCX. I think YCX might even be better off for playing with Savior. It did feel like they played off each other well. Even if I'm not a big fan of Savior individually, I think that this is fine to retain them as a bot lane. I think Sasa and the bot lane were definitely the pieces that I wanted to see come back. And honestly, I do agree with bringing back Climber. It's just hopeful that you're kind of hopeful that you can get the right development coming out of him, right? Because this is a guy who dominated tier 2. Like, he was the best jungler in tier 2 when he was playing down there in the LDL. He's been given a couple of opportunities at the tier 1 level, and it's never really looked all that good for him. He was not particularly good last year. Obviously, he got benched partway through the year for Nio, and then Nio goes to Ninjas and Pyjamas. He gets to start again. Doesn't really look great coming back, but we've seen this super consistently for players, especially young players in the LPL, where it's really tough for junglers to make that day 1 impact at the LPL level. The difference in quality between playing in the LDL, especially as like a primary carry, somebody that can be the main character of their own team, versus going to like a bad LPL team, it's really tough to make that transition. We saw it with Nio, who really struggled at first for Rare Atom and took some time to get his feet under him and then was really good at the end of last year. You know, I kind of push for someone like Sorrow to get that same, you know, narrative arc, generally speaking, where you give him a bit of time at the tier 1 level, although he really got barely any games at the tier 1 level, and then, you know, you give him more time in tier 2, he comes back and is a little bit more adjusted. I think that there is a world where Climber comes out this year and starts to show a lot of that promise because that development trajectory is so consistent for a lot of the young junglers that come up. I also think there's a world where he just is what he is, and that he is what he was last year, unfortunately, which is a good facilitator, somebody who can be valuable at making sure that his solo lanes in particular are in good spots to be able to win early, but not somebody that really has the tools to like break or alter the game all that much. He's very stable, very sound. You know, even at his worst, he's going to be an okay player. I just didn't really get excited watching his tape. He wasn't taking risks. He wasn't like screwing up in a way that you want to see rookies screw up, which is you want to see the upside and you also feel okay giving away some negative plays because of that. That's what we just talked about with someone like Sasa, where the good games look really good, even if the bad games kind of need to be cleaned up. There really just weren't all that many good games from Climber. He just kind of was overall a net negative for the team. So hopefully he can kind of figure things out in like the full year 2 that I think he's hopefully going to get now. And then finally, we get to talk about Tong Yuan coming in here into the mid lane instead of Xiao Qinghua. Obviously, this is kind of a side grade for me. I've talked about both of these players pretty extensively on the channel. I'm not a fan of either of them. I think both of them are both overrated and properly rated at the same time. I think that there is a section of the community that will go to bat for these two players. I am not a part of that section. I definitely think that they have consistently been the weak links on their individual teams for quite a long time. Xiao Qinghua has just never found any consistency and, you know, at times was miserably bad, was like worst mid laner in the LPL kind of bad last year, even if he did also have good moments. Tong Yuan at times has been the worst mid laner in the LPL, and I think for the most part has continued to shock me in the fact that teams still think that he's like good and that he's like somebody that you can invest in. He's shown flashes, mostly his rookie split where he ended up taking over the RNG job from Angel. That was the best split he ever played. He at the very least was like kind of valuable. He was about an average player during his rookie split. There weren't a lot of rookies, so he ended up winning rookie of the split, you know, all of that stuff. He was fine during that, you know, era of RNG, and then the moment that that team got bad, he was like the reason that they were losing games. He became the worst mid laner in the entire league. I had him rated as such going into last year, and all he really did was live up to that. I don't really get taking another chance on him. Like, I'm sorry, I just don't really see it in him as a player. I am giving him a bit of a floor here as a C+. I've given some C grades out in this video. Tong Yuan feels like the kind of player that I would give a C grade, but I don't know. There is like a floor to a player that at the very least has the mechanical ability to win in lane. But again, he just has no idea what he's supposed to be doing in the mid game. He's never played particularly well with his junglers. That's always been a big problem for him on RNG, where it feels like he's just completely disconnected. He'll have games every once in a while where he looks okay, but you know, there was a player on LGD for a long time in Jin Zhao who was playing support for this team for quite a bit after role swapping there. And I had a joke where it's like, Jin Zhao is predictably going to be like the third worst support in the league every single year, no matter who is below him, no matter who is above him. He'll have 2 or 3 games where he looks awesome, and every other game will not be very good, and you can just kind of count on that. Tong Yuan's like the mid lane version of that. Like, that is just what you're getting out of this guy, where you're going to have a week where he looks like really good, and the rest of the year he's going to be bad. Like, it's just kind of the consistency that we've seen on RNG. Maybe a better and more, you know, positive atmosphere, we'll just say, getting out of the RNG system will be good for him, but it's hard for me to predict that, just because I think he was a big reason why those teams underperformed with his lack of production in the mid lane. So for LGD, I like keeping the core together. I like Sasa, I like YCX, and I agree with bringing back Savior and Climber. I would have gone a different direction in the mid lane, certainly. I don't think Tong Yuan is like the single worst thing you could have done. You know, someone like Fodic going to Invictus Gaming is more egregious in my opinion, but it's certainly not a change I'm excited about. Do I think LGD has raised their ceiling? Probably not. You're still hoping for a breakout from one of these players to turn into an actual difference maker in the way that Monkey became that for WE last year. And if you don't get that, you're probably going to continue to be outside of the top 10. But is this team going to be bottom 1? Almost certainly not. They just never are. And I don't think they made their roster bad enough to be in a position where they're going to be like absolutely terrible. I just think they're likely going to be basically the same team they were last year. But then moving on to our 12th team of the video, and this is a team that I actually do like the offseason of. Finally, a bit of a change of pace. It's Thunder Talk Gaming that is reinvesting into some youth, into some LDL players that I think performed well, and you know what? They're the LDL players I personally would have taken a punt on, certainly in comparison to maybe some of the other players we've talked about, cough cough, Ultra Prime. So excited to talk about this. I don't think everything here is sunshine and rainbows. I think that obviously I would have loved if they were able to retain 1xN and continue to build around him. If he was the starting AD carry for this team, I think you're all of a sudden looking at a team that has the potential to actually break through into, like, I'm not going to say the upper echelon or anything like that, but could they be this year's WE if they had 1XM? Maybe. I certainly think that that would be possible. As it stands now, I think their ceiling is probably a bit lower in terms of what you're expecting, but they still are a very interesting young roster. So let's go ahead and get into it. Their lineup for 2026 is looking like Keshi, formerly known as LQH, in the top lane, Junhao in the jungle, Haru in the mid lane, Ryan 3 at AD carry, and Feather at support. Again, if Ryan 3 is pronounced some other way, you let me know. It's a very funny name if his name is Ryan 3, but if it's, you know, something else, and this is just the way that it translates to English, also let me know that. I just can't imagine that his name is Ryan 3. That is very funny to me, but I'm excited to talk about the rest of this team. We'll get into Ryan in just a little bit. Only one non-change from last year, and that is Feather coming back as the lone returning player. I think that this is totally fine. Feather actually showed a lot of good traits, I would say, over the course of 2025. I've really liked him in the past when he's gotten limited runs on other teams as well. He's always been a player that I think I've found interesting as a playmaker, has that, you know, instinct that I always talk about. I know I kind of, you know, very, very ominously try to quantify this idea of like has playmaking instincts. It's really hard to be able to narrow down why a player has playmaking instincts, but you can just tell the players that are more aggressive mentally and are constantly looking for those engage angles, and players that are a little bit more, you know, rigid and structured in the way that they want to play. Feather, I think, has that open ability to kind of see the game in a little bit more of a free-flowing way, which really helped Thunder Talk last year, especially with a player like 1XN as the AD carry. He was really good at being able to set him up in lane for a lot of success, and that 2v2 was really good. I think Feather is a good player to be able to retain here. I guess I just wish they were also able to retain his bot lane partner, but certainly no problems with Feather coming back. I think he's the right player to, you know, keep along with 1XN kind of leaving to go to what is presumed to be a better team, but the rest of this team is shuffled up, and it's shuffled up from a lot of different directions. Junhao, the only other player on this team to have played in the LPL last year, of course, the starting jungler for Ultra Prime. He was pretty good for that team. I think he's a bit undervalued right now by a lot of the community. I think that there were so many good moments from Junhao that I actually kind of get excited to see him on a team that has a lot of other young, interesting prospects on it, because I think as a carry, he's really, really solid at generating resources in the early game. Can he be a bit flippy? Absolutely, but last year was his rookie year. He wasn't a particularly dominant prospect in the LDL from my perspective in comparison to, you know, other junglers that have come up. We already talked about Nio, who, you know, really dominated that tier 2 level, but players like Climber and Sorrow and Milky Way that had a lot of success at the tier 2 level and, you know, came up and took some time to get going. He didn't have that same level of success that I think, you know, a lot of those other players did, but he was arguably better in his rookie year than a lot of those other players were in their first 10 years. So I'm excited to see if that leap continues to happen to him as well. Either way, this is absolutely an upgrade over what they got in the second part of the year out of Xiao Honggren, who's just a bad player. Like, I'm sorry. I've been on this train since 2022. I remember, like, absolutely fighting people in the comments section back in 2022 of these videos. I was defending Beichuan at the time, like, very, very actively, you know, for a long time on this team, kind of calling him the glue and the anchor that kind of made everything work when Yukao was here. And people were like, well, he's blocking Xiao Honggren. Every Reddit thread that you would read, every post-match thread on Thunder Talk is like, why would Beichuan ever start over Xiao Honggren? And I'm like, man, I don't think anybody's actually watching this guy play in the LDL, because all of this hype for a solo queue prospect has not translated at all to competitive play. He was never good in tier 2, and he came up to tier 1 and was like the worst jungler in the entire league. So yeah, you know what? I feel pretty good about my analysis on Xiao Honggren. I feel like I was right about him most of the time, and I think this is just a straight-up upgrade. He was, like I said, probably the worst jungler in the entire league last year, and so to bring in somebody who at the very least showed flashes of being a good starter, somebody that I am excited has another shot here in the LPL, I think that's an upgrade. I think that that is a good move. And then you've got the solo laners, more moves that I actually really like, and I have these listed as changes because there is theoretically a chance that there is a floor to these moves that doesn't turn out as well as I maybe want, but realistically, these are upgrades as well. If you really want to go on that department, I think they're better day number 1, and they give you more upside than the imports you had in the 2 solo lanes before. You're bringing in Keshi, like I said, formerly known as LQH for BLG Juniors on the top side, and the BLG Juniors mid laner, and Haru, who really is kind of the prize for me. I think Sorrow and Haru, like as a duo, were just so incredible to watch together that I was really excited to see if either of them were going to get consistent LPL jobs. Haru was the one that kind of came away with it, but we'll talk about Keshi first. Keshi's an interesting player. He can kind of do a bit of everything. I think he's a bit more versatile than he gets credit for. His laning is actually really solid. I was really impressed with the way he was able to play out losing matchups and, you know, be able to neutralize game states. That's not always something that's very common in tier 2 players, and so Hopefully he's going to be able to turn that into some success. Of course, he wasn't always the starting top laner for this team down the stretch of the year. They rotated, BLG Juniors did, throughout a lot of players, as we've already talked about in this video, but I think he was definitely the best and most interesting top laner that they ended up playing, and I'm excited to see him get a shot here on Thunder Talk, even if I don't think he's, like, entirely separated from everybody else on that team. Still a B- for me. I think as a prospect, he's a really intriguing one, and I think he's probably better day number 1 than Hoya was for this team, or at the very least, you know, that's kind of what I saw on tape, so excited about that. But like I said, really, Haru is kind of the prize here, and this is an upgrade. Like, in all seriousness, there is no way that this is anything other than better than what you got out of Satab last year. Haru is a really good prospect, and he is an import. I know a lot of people kind of point to that being a bit of a negative towards him, but come on, man. Like, this guy dominated the LDL. I don't know if there were players that I would say were consistently better than him throughout a lot of the year, at least when you watch all of, like, Split 1, Split 2, and Split 3. I haven't seen every single game, obviously. I cover enough on this channel, but in everything that I saw, this guy knows how to control game states, he knows how to push his advantages forward, and he's awesome at team fighting. Like, he could actually be a really, really good mid laner at this level if he continues to develop. You know, I'm not going to say that that's definitely going to happen. The LDL to LPL pipeline is not always a particularly fruitful one. I would say this is one of the least successful leagues to get actual tier 2 talent in. It just doesn't really feel like a lot of tier 2 players actually develop in the LPL, but if there is one that I think showed a lot of the traits that you want to see, I think Haru kind of is that guy, maybe outside of Sorrow going into 2026. But again, Haru has a job and Sorrow does not. So really excited for this team to go from, you know, probably the lowest upside mid laner in the entire league in Satab to a player in Haru that I think is genuinely just very fun to watch. But Ryan 3 is the last player we get to talk about here in the AD carry role. This is an internal promotion for this team, the only one that we are getting. It is a promotion from Thunder Talk's youth team, and you know what? I'm fine with that. Like, they have hit on this before. 1xN was a really nice pickup for them, and obviously has turned into a player that I think a lot of people are very excited about. I've kind of pumped the brakes on the idea that I think he could be like a top tier AD carry at this level, but I think he is a good ADC at this level, clearly the best of, like, the developing young ADCs in the LPL right now. And Ryan 3, I think, is another punt in that direction. Unfortunately, I do kind of have to consider this a downgrade, because if Ryan was as good as 1xN was last year, that would be a pretty big outcome overall for Thunder Talk. But I don't hate the idea that, hey, you know, it worked the first time. We like what we see in Ryan. I think the tape there is okay, at least good enough for me to feel comfortable with the promotion. I don't think he was exceptionally good, but it's really hard to separate yourself in the LDL, especially, again, because it's so hard to find games, especially for Thunder Talk's youth team. Like, it is really, really tough to find, you know, consistent tape and watch more than just a couple of games of Ryan. So kind of a to-be-determined approach on him as a player. I think Feather is a good support. It is likely that these two are going to, at the very least, be competitive as a bot lane. I don't think they'll be the worst in the entire league, but what really gets me excited about Thunder Talk is Keshi, it's especially Haru, and it's Junhao, even Feather coming back here. You know, we've talked about a couple of teams that have invested into some young players. I think that there were players that were passed over in order to get to certain outcomes. This is not one of those teams. Maybe I would have preferred someone like Chester here as well. Again, just go full in on the BLG Juniors, like, team, but at the end of the day, I think you brought in a lot of talent, and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but from a process perspective, I think Thunder Talk did just about as well as you could do, bringing up players from the best team in Tier 2. But then moving on to our penultimate team of this video, and the last one that technically participated in the summer split, the team that got last in summer, it's LNG Esports that we get to talk about, and they are retooling, they are revamping after a disastrous 2025, coming off of a Worlds appearance in 2024. They look to, at the very least, be a bit more competitive going into 2026. That's not to say that I think this roster is definitely going to work. This is the kind of roster building that typically always fails in League of Legends, which is to say, buying low on 5 players and trying to build a role player team, if you will, with no, like, actual real star player. You look around at a lot of the rosters that are built with this idea in mind, and often they are worse than the sum of their parts. These players go off into different places and perform better, but together they just can't seem to get it done. And you know what? I kind of expect that to happen here for LNG, but maybe they end up being a bit more competitive than I am anticipating. Their lineup is looking like Sheer in the top lane, Krako in the jungle, Bulldog in the mid lane, 1xN at AD carry, and missing at support. There are genuinely good players on this team, and I think in comparison, obviously, to what they had last year, this is not a bad team by any stretch of the imagination. They were a disaster in 2025. They had to completely retool their own bot lane because it was the worst in the entire league. Fodek and Joao were just not good enough as a duo. Fodek is not an LPL caliber player. It makes it even funnier that he's obviously on Invictus Gaming now. Joao, I think, obviously was what he was. He ends up going to LGD Gaming, actually doing fine for them, but they bring up their LDL bot lane and Fish 1 in OVO, and they're not ready worthy to be playing in Tier 1. They were clearly not good enough to be playing in Tier 1. Obviously, getting a real LPL bot lane in the building is going to be a good thing, but there were places where I don't even know if they got better in the offseason, and that makes me a bit concerned for what this team is going to look like this year. We can start with the upgrades, which is the bot lane. You're, of course, going from a team that, really couldn't find anything in the bot lane last year, no matter what the configuration of players ended up looking like, whether it was Fodic and then LP and then Fish1, whoever was in the building, they consistently had the worst AD carry play in the LPL throughout all of last year, and then the support play got much worse once Joao left as well. Obviously not having like a true LPL caliber player in the building wasn't very good, so they go out and get two LPL caliber players, both coming off of very different circumstances. 1xN, definitely the player you are the most excited about on this roster because he's really the only one who's going up right now in terms of where the arrow is pointing. He was pretty good last year for Thunder Talk. This is a guy that I think has consistently gotten better over the course of his career. A lot of people have kind of claimed him to be, the big up-and-coming AD carry prospect in China. I'm really not a part of that in terms of like expecting him to break out. I've talked about this in the, I talked about it in the Thunder Talk segment, and I've talked about it a lot on the channel previously as well. I don't really see elite traits in 1xM. I don't think there's ever a world where I would expect this guy to become one of the 3 to 5 best AD carries in the league, but can he be a serviceable player? Can he, be what Hope is in a best case scenario? Yeah, I think he could kind of turn into that player. I don't think it would be all that crazy to say he's there right now, that he's like a decent player, a B grade, somebody who you feel good about starting, who, he's going to be the carry on this team. He's going to be the one that they put a lot of the resources into. I think he can pay that back. He can be the best player on a middle tier team that tries to compete for a playoff spot. It's all really about the surrounding core. I just don't necessarily think I expect, like, again, elite upside from him. I don't know if this is ever a player that I think will ever get to that B+ or A- kind of range. I just don't think he has the traits. Again, his mechanics are fine, but they're not elite. He doesn't have those ridiculous hands. That's why I always preferred talking about someone like Leave, who is significantly less consistent and has a much less well-rounded game than 1xN, but at the very least has those traits that you could feasibly imagine could turn into one of the better AD carries in the world. I don't see that kind of ceiling. I think 1xN is going to be a high floor, low ceiling kind of player. Totally fine for a team like LNG that just needs competent play out of the AD carry role, and the floor is so high, like the floor is probably like a B or a B- that you're not really worried about him just completely sucking this year. He's a good player, and they're happy to have him. The other upgrade here, and at least the other one that's interesting to talk about in a completely different way, is Missing coming into the support position. This is an upgrade because Missing is a very well-established and, historic support here, I think is fair to say, in the LPL. He's been on some pretty important teams, arguably some of the most important in LPL history, most notably that 2023 LGD Gaming team, of course, as the starting support, but it is unquestionable that this guy is coming off of the worst year of his entire career. There is basically nothing to say. In fact, I would argue that 2024 was not a good year, that Missing was actively detrimental to JDG's success, that Ruler ended up taking a lot of the blame in that final year on JDG because of how bad Missing was playing, and he was even worse last year. B- is not how Missing played in 2025. I can be pretty vocal about that. This was not a player that was anywhere in contention for being an average or okay starter at the support position. They needed to replace him, so much so that they had to go and find multiple other players just to get any sort of production out of that position. You are buying low on Missing, hopefully hoping that you can get him back into the form that he was in 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023. That version of Missing that was constantly performing like one of the best supports in the world. You're hoping to get that back, and pairing him up with someone like 1xM is exciting if you are getting the good version of Missing. But one of the big problems that I think Missing has run into over the past couple of years is that I think he's kind of been meta'd out. This is a guy who I think really preferred to play for the 2v2. He is somebody who is very lane dominant as a support, and now that the meta has transitioned and rotated more into skirmishing around things like grubs early on in the game, I think a lot of the things that he's really good at have been neutralized a little bit more than they have been for other supports of his era. And I think we're seeing that. You can't play enchanters at all. I think Missing was one of the best enchanter support players in the world when those things were meta, but they're really not meta right now unless you play a very specific style of bot lane. And again, I just don't know if this team is going to be investing a lot into that 2v2 with someone like Kroko, who wants to skirmish a lot in the early game. So I think there's a world where Missing comes in and is once again bad for this team, but at the very least, I think no matter what, you're getting a higher floor here than what you got out of OVO last year, who was just, again, not an LPL caliber player. I think bringing in an actual professional into the building, even if you are buying low on a player that is on the downturn in their career, is a good move. And hopefully that stability and that knowledge, that veteran leadership can help 1xN. And maybe if this bot lane can be really good in the 2v2, which I think is very possible, by the way, that is their strength in terms of a team, is that I think this 2v2 is going to be very strong. If that is going to be what they play through, then all of a sudden I think there is some sort of upside to this team, and I think Missing could perform better in that environment. As for the rest of the team, we'll talk about the mid jungle in just a second because I think I have less positive things to say there. We'll start with top lane. I think Sheer is like quietly a good addition for this team, or a good punt to take, a good risk to take on the top side. I don't think he was awful last year. I think he was really bad down the stretch for FPX. He was really bad in the big moments, especially once Jeje ended up joining the team as the starting jungler. It felt like everything kind of fell apart for him on the top side in summer, but he was pretty good in spring and was pretty good in winter and was obviously very exciting on JD Gaming as a rookie in 2024. There is something to tap into here for Sheer. This is going to be listed as a downgrade because he was absolutely not the player that you wanted him to be last year in his first real starting opportunity in the LPL, at least as a full-time starter when he's not sharing the spot with Flandra on JD Gaming like he did a couple of years ago. But it's a downgrade because LNG actually had a really good top laner last year, right? Like we talked about Zika, a player that I really value and think is really solid at this level. Sheer is not Zika, and I don't think you expect him to be this year, but if you can get some of that development, he is one of the few top lane players at all in the LPL that I actually do think has elite level mechanics and like has elite level upside. There is a star player here. Do I think you're going to get it out of him at any point in his career? Probably not. I would very much bet against him turning into the player I thought he could be when he first debuted for JDG. I just think the development trajectory is not necessarily there right now. I think he needs a lot of coaching to get to where he needs to be. If he was in a top tier organization, I would actually feel really good about him developing. Like if he stayed with JD Gaming or if he went to, you know, a top esports or something like that, like would I expect Sheer to actually continue to develop and become one of the better top laners in the league? Maybe. I think that's the kind of environment that could have done really well for him. As it stands, he's gone to FPX, who folded, and now to an LNG team that has no idea what they're actually doing in terms of player development. I don't expect him to really break out. I think he's going to be an average starter. B-, I think, really encapsulates my feelings on Sheer. I like that he's starting. I think he should be given a chance in the LPL, but I'm certainly not convinced that he's going to be like a good starter. I think likely he probably ends in the average range somewhere in the middle of top laners for me, but that is a downgrade to what Zika was on a really struggling LNG team last year. And then you get your mid-jungle duo, Krako and Bulldog. Krako coming over from Bro, at least playing for Bro for the end of last year, coming in to replace Hambach. He stabilized that team, but he is not a stable player. That is definitely not the way to describe Krako. LPL fans are decently familiar with him from his time on Anyone's Legend, but I think he is exactly what he's supposed to be as a player. Like B-, I think, is the perfect encapsulation for how Krako plays the game, because he's likely going to be one of the more mediocre junglers in terms of overall result. Like he's going to be somewhere square in the middle of a lot of these junglers, but he's going to get there in such a controversial way where the bad games are just going to look so atrociously bad and the good games are going to be good. And I honestly, like the thing with Krako, I've always really liked this guy as a player. I've kind of been a big Krako defender over the course of his career. He has more good games than bad games, and that's not always very common out of the players of this archetype. It's just that the bad games are egregiously bad. Like he will single-handedly lose you a game every once in a while, which is never really a great place to land if you are a jungler. But I think in comparison to some of the other options available, I like Krako. I think he's kind of on the downturn of the career. Like I said, I don't think he's on the up in the same way that I don't think Missing is on the up, and I certainly don't think Bulldog is on the up, which I will talk about in just a second. But Krako is far from the most egregious pick here. I actually kind of liked Xiaofang last year. I think he was really interesting as a jungler, and I honestly kind of wish they continued with him, but I think in terms of veteran stability and somebody that can come in and actually be a playmaker for this team, it makes sense to bring someone like Krako in. And then Bulldog. This is probably the move I like the least in terms of LNG this offseason. I think a lot of people are going to look at Bulldog as what he was a couple of years ago, and I just don't agree that that is where he is anymore. I've been super vocal about this on the channel and about my thoughts on Bulldog and generally my thoughts about the Freaks organization, both as Afrika, as Kwangdong, as DN. Like that team and that organization has consistently failed every young player that has come through it, and they make every player that plays for them worse. And I think Bulldog is the prime example that I would like to give for why that feels like such a passionate argument for me. Bulldog came in as a 17-year-old, as the youngest player in the LCK, and looked pretty good as a rookie. He was really dominant in lane. He just had no idea what he was supposed to be doing after the laning phase. He was not a particularly competitively ready player, but he had great mechanics, and he had a really good understanding of how to generate resources for himself. It's a fantastic foundation for a mid laner at the LCK level. If you are good enough mechanically to compete with a lot of the best mid laners in lane, you can do anything as long as you grow your skill set. And all that has happened since that rookie year is he has gotten worse and worse and worse, and it's been very obvious why. It is clear that DN, or the Freaks in general, even when they were KDF, said, okay, you are a really good laner. What we're going to do in practice sessions in terms of your focus in development is we are going to put all of those skill points into making you better in the mid game and making you more of a team player, somebody who can be more of a secondary carry and a facilitator. And what that has done, it has taken away, it has siphoned away a lot of his ability to dominate in the early game. He's just gotten worse at it. It's clear that that's not really been a focus of his game. He's kind of taken, you know, time away from practicing that to be more of this mid game player. And unfortunately for him, he just doesn't have a good mid-game understanding. He doesn't have the game sense to ever be a good mid-game player. So he's kind of taken this idea and said, I don't want to be the main carry. You know, I've kind of been told that I need to, you know, be more of a team player. And then he's kind of played into that role, and that role he's not very good at. Like, it's the weak part of his game. That would be equivocal to if someone like Leave was like told to be a weak side AD carry every game and just get really good at that. Don't do anything else. Just play weak side AD carry every game. He's going to become a worse player because it's the thing he's not good at. Like, it doesn't make sense to me. Bulldog's development has been completely stifled over in the LCK, and I think this could theoretically be an opportunity for him to get back on track. Just getting out of the Freak system, I think, generally is good for most players. Getting anywhere else in the world, I think, will genuinely make you a better player. But the problem is that Bulldog has been awful in the LCK. He was terrible this past year. I don't want to scare, you know, LNG fans or people who want Bulldog to succeed, but genuinely the player that I compare Bulldog to the most is Satab. I think that that is a very fair comparison for what he looked like in his last year in the LCK and what I think you can expect out of him in his first year in the LPL. There might be some good moments and some flashes of that mechanical brilliance that we saw a couple of years ago when he was such a young prospect, but I think the overall package has been ruined beyond belief by the team he played for, and until he proves to me that he isn't just the worst version of himself, because again, I can't stress this enough, he has gotten worse and worse and worse every year. He was good, and then he was fine, and then he was bad, right? Like, the arrow is shooting down on Bulldog until I can see any sort of upward momentum in that development track. I just can't really believe that this is a good import and a good signing. I can't stress enough, this is buying low on 5 players here for LNG. Even 1XM, who had a good year last year, you are buying low on the idea that he's going to turn into more later on in his career. You're not bringing in a player that is like definitely going to be a superstar or anything like that, a proven top tier player. He's never played for a team that's actually ever been anywhere near competitive success. So this is tough. Like, it's really hard for me to believe in a roster like this because they just fail so regularly in League of Legends. In every region, we see these role player rosters just not work out, where you bring together a bunch of players who had failed in their last stops and try to, you know, become better than the sum of your parts. It's almost always the opposite. And so it's really hard, again, for me to believe that LNG is going to compete. But could they be, like, relevant in some way? Sure. Like, could they be what FPX or NIP were last year, where they're like a borderline top 8 team, maybe not one of the worst in the league, but not one that's competitive? Yeah, I would honestly bet that they're probably somewhere in that vicinity. They're better than the worst teams, and they're not as good as the teams that are actually like real playoff teams that have real rosters that have a lot going on for them. But I think there is theoretically some upside if you do end up hitting on players that have looked good before, if you can reverse the Bulldog trajectory, if Sheer starts developing, if Missing can get back on track, if 1XN does actually take that leap. There are things that could go right here. I'm just kind of betting against those happening. It feels like they're mostly unlikely. But that's going to bring us to our final team of the video. The only team in the video that technically did not play in the LPL in the summer split of last year because they were one of the bottom 2 in spring. It's, oh my god, it's OMG that are making their return, unlike RNG, who ended up folding after their time down in the LDL. OMG committed to playing in the LDL, and while they weren't successful, they are making another push here in 2026 to try and be relevant at the LPL level. Do I think they succeeded? No, I think this offseason's kind of weird. There are so many changes that I just don't understand. I think one of them is great, and I'm really excited to talk about Rayo. I don't know how else to say his name in the jungle, but god, am I excited to talk about him. Even Juhan, who they brought in here as a substitute jungler because that guy can't get a starting spot. He's always the 6th man on every single roster. Like, he's probably the 2nd best player on this team. You know, all of that stuff I think is good. It's the rest of the roster, and especially some of the retentions that I'm just not excited about. Let's go ahead and get into it. Their lineup is looking like Harry in the top lane, Rayo in the jungle, Haichao in the mid lane, Starry at AD carry, and Moham at support. 3 retentions from last year, 2 new players, jungle mid has swapped up, and I think part of that is good, part of that is bad. I'm certainly going to talk about that, but we can start with the retentions and the bot lane because I think this is clearly the core that they are building around. I still see some potential in Starry. I'm going to be honest, I really like Starry as a player. I think that there is definitely something there to build around. I think he has a good skill set. I think he has a good idea of how to carry games. He's good in lane, he's good out of lane. Like, there is definitely a player here that I think you can, figure out how to unlock a little bit more. I think we saw a lot of glimpses of that at the end of 2024, and it just never was there in 2025 because he didn't really have the opportunity or the chance to be able to show that off on a team that was an absolute disaster. I don't think things are going to change all that much going into this year, but is Starry a player that I feel okay taking a gamble on? Absolutely. I think he's a good prospect, genuinely for where he's at right now. I get that this is technically year 3 in the LPL, but like, this guy's barely played. He played only the end of the year for OMG, like the end of 2024, and then, this team wasn't even playing in the LPL at the end of 2025. So hopefully he can actually get a year of development in here because I think there is a player that you can nurture, and maybe in a different organization I'd feel a bit better about this, but unfortunately I just don't know if he's going to have the chance because Moham is back here in the support position, and talk about a player that I'm just not excited about. Talk about a player that does not instill confidence in me. Moham is not a good support. Like, I'm sorry, he's just not all that good at the things that he does. He's an engage one trick. He doesn't play anything else. He's going to play Rel and Nautilus and Alistair, and if he doesn't get, or Leona as well, if he doesn't get those 4, he's cooked. Like, he's unplayable on almost any other support in the entire game, which is a really bad place for him to land. And even when he is on those champions, he's not always the most consistent with the ways that he's able to find these teamfight engages. He's good in the 5v5s. It's why D plus Kia brought him in as a quote-unquote replacement to Kellen, even though he was infinitely worse than Kellen the moment he subbed in and made that team's macro way worse. But he's just not good for a developing team. He is not the kind of player that you want with an AD carry that you are trying to make better and that you are trying to grow into kind of the future of your franchise. I think he will limit the upside of what Starry can accomplish because he is such a polarizing player. He needs a very specific playstyle. He needs his AD carry to play a very specific way. And quite frankly, he needs to engage in very specific ways at very specific times. He just doesn't open up the floor for any sort of creativity or any sort of flexibility in game plan. And I don't think that's good for a bottom tier team. I think having something that you're really good at is important, but like, he's a passably good player at the thing that he's good at, and he does nothing else. C+, I think, is generous for the grade, but I think he is fine enough for the role that he fills. It's just, I don't really like that role, and I would not have retained Moham on this team. I think you absolutely needed to move into a different direction. And speaking of moving into a different direction, when are we giving up on Harry? Like, at what point do we just go, oh wow, this guy's just bad at every part of the game? Like, how much does this guy have to show before we say that we can't bring him back again in the top lane? I just don't get it. He has shown nothing. His best tape is as a rookie on Anyone's Legend, where he basically got all the resources in the world, and even then I was pushing back on him. I was super anti the narrative that him and Xiaoshu were in kind of the same conversation as young top laners that were both rookies in the same year. Harry was absolutely the worst prospect, and I think that that has proven itself to be true, and all he has done since then is be the worst top laner in the league. Like, there is no conversation, there is no debate. This guy is not an LPL caliber player. He wouldn't be a top 5 to 7 top laner in the LDL. You want to know how I know? He wasn't even playing for OMG in the LDL. They benched him for Lamb, who had been playing for BLG Juniors the year before. Like, Harry is just not a player that I want to see at the LPL level. I'm sorry, this is, in my opinion, the worst player in the league. I think Guwon will give him a run for his money, but I imagine Guwon will be better than him. There's clearly something I'm not seeing that he is showing in scrims to get a job like this. Harry is unequivocally the worst player in the LPL right now, and that's just really frustrating for me. C, again, to me, is generous. If there was ever anybody in this video to get a C- grade, I think it would be Harry, who I've just completely given up on him. I do not understand bringing him back to this team. And then you've got the jungle mid, and there's good and bad here. We'll get to the bad first so we can end on something positive. Haichao's coming in here to the mid lane. This is a curious decision. Haichao is kind of a one-year wonder right now in terms of his career. That 1 year was 2024, so it's not exactly forever ago. 2025 was kind of a return to the form that we expected from him. He was a player that I had basically given up on at the beginning of 2024, like at the end of 2023, when he had been given multiple years on LGD and had never really developed. They gave him one more shot in 2024, and he's really good for that team. He ends up developing developing in a way that I think a lot of people didn't expect. He carries a lot of games for them to be able to get into the playoffs that year, which again, a lot of people don't expect. And all of a sudden he's looking like an interesting pickup in the offseason. He's the consolation prize for LNG after they miss out on Scout. And, you know, I felt okay about it. I was like, oh yeah, he could be like a top 6 to 8 mid laner in the LPL. Like, you can feel good about that. And then he immediately regressed back to being the worst, or one of the worst mid laners in the league. There's a lot of competition for that award, but Haichao was very much a part of that discussion. The only reason he gets a C+ grade is because he's at least been good in the LPL at some point. Again, there has been good tape on this guy, but I don't understand why you're bringing in Haichao and not just going with Linfang or Charlotte. You know, they had both of those two players. I think Linfang is definitely better, especially if you're bringing Rayo in as the jungler. Those two played in the LDL together. It would make sense to have that sort of chemistry, but the two options you had internally, I think, are both better options than Haichao, at least in terms of what we saw last year. It's just that Haichao theoretically has the upside of potentially getting back to where he was 2 years ago. If that can happen, this is an okay move, and this could be like them going out and getting Angel or something like that a couple of years ago, but again, the big difference is that Angel was coming off of one of the best years of his career on Ninjas in Pyjamas, or like the big resurgence that he had, whereas Haichao was coming off of a miserable year on LNG, a team that did absolutely terribly. So, you know, another buy low option instead of just promoting internally, which I don't like. And then it looks like it is going to be Rayo as the starting jungler here for OMG. I like this move. I also really like Juhan. They brought him in from DRX, and obviously he's played for, you know, Giant X over in the LEC before. Like, he's been around the block, but forever the sixth man. It just kind of is the way that it is with his career. He's basically an extended coach at this point, but Rayo deserves a promotion. This was another player that I got to the tape of, and I'm like, I have no idea what to expect out of this guy. Like, it's an OMG youth player. OMG was playing in the LDL. If you're a youth player for OMG, then that's not good, right? Like, you are on the second LDL team of this organization, but he was better than anybody on OMG last year. Like, he just straight up was in terms of the way he played, and he was good in the LDL. I'm actually kind of excited to see what he can turn into. I think this is the correct decision to internally promote. I think that there is a player here if they do end up going in that direction. Now, if Juhan does start, I think he brings more of a floor to this team. I still like Juhan. He would also be a B- grade. Like I said, they're probably the two best players in this org right now, which is not really a great place to be, but you know, it is what it is. Whoever ends up starting Rayo gives you more upside with his ability to carry games and his aggressive playstyle. Juhan is pretty much exclusively a tank player, somebody who wants to be more of a facilitator, but that could be okay for a team that clearly wants to play around Starry and around Moham's engage timers. So, you know, I think both could end up working out. Again, I would prefer Rayo. Either way, it's an upgrade over what they had last year. Beishong ended up being the player to close out their LPL tenure, at least over Hang, who was not good. Also, I do want to insert here, there are some conversations about Hang starting over Climber on LGD. If that happens, sorry, I'm recording this again like 4 days or so before it goes out, so if things end up changing, I do apologize. I'll post a pinned comment if people really want me to talk about that. But Beishong is, again, just another player that I think is on the downturn. Clearly not a good enough player to be playing in the LPL. They picked up Tianjin in the LDL, and he was not good. He was fine. I'm not even gonna say he was terrible. He was fine for this team. Rayo was clearly the most interesting option, and Juhan I think is also fine. Both of those players would be upgrades to whatever they had in the jungle last year, but I just can't get excited about OMG. Like, I like Starry and I like Rayo, and I think that there is a chance that Haichao could return to some form and at least be playable this upcoming year. But how do you feel excited about a team that's running back Moham and Harry? Like, it's just impossible for me to feel good about the state that this organization is in. Moham is just such a limiting player, and Harry is just bad at every part of the game. I don't really understand the direction that this org is heading in. I think that they're still in a bad spot, and I would once again expect them to contend for the bottom of the LPL. All right, but that is going to do it for my LPL 2026 off-season grades and analysis video. This is 3 hours long. This is a mammoth video that we are putting out here, but there's so many teams in the LPL, and I didn't want to skimp out on information. You guys are here for a podcast. I might as well give you what you're looking for. I do hope you enjoyed. If you did, leave a like. It really does help the channel out a lot more than you could ever know. It helps get it into the algorithm. I talked about like the hype feature and subscribing and all of that stuff. It's so good for the channel. You guys have no clue how helpful it is for the algorithm, I'll just say, especially if you've made it this far into the video. You're clearly interested in this kind of content. It really does mean a lot. Leave a comment as well. Comments help the algorithm in just the same kinds of ways. But overall, we're done now with the off-season grades video. The next thing you are going to see on this channel are the primers for the winter split. That's going to be after all the preseason tournaments, so it's going to be after Demacia Cup, which I am casting. Again, links in the description if you are interested in that. And it will be after Kespa ends and everything like that. So, you know, we won't be back around on this channel in particular until the beginning of winter, but you can catch me on LPL English. Links to the YouTube and Twitch are in the description, so find me there and support that product as well. Like, LPL English is phenomenal. The people who run it are just incredible. They're always so, you know, open, and they offer such a great service to the League community. They put so much effort in, so really would mean a lot if you went and gave them a follow. But I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all